Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our LIISMA Partners meeting. We have some people in the room here with us, and we have other people on Zoom. This is our first hybrid in-person and Zoom virtual meeting. Welcome. Abby, can you advance for me? I'm Bill Jacobs, Program Manager for LIISMA. With me are my colleagues, Abby Bespretsik, our Field Project and Outreach Coordinator, and Melody Penny, our Invasive Species Technician. We want to begin by thanking the staff that we were fortunate to be able to work with this year. Haley Gladich. Haley has gone on to graduate school in Scotland. We had a seasonal technician, Catherine Sturber. Catherine's back at Binghamton in college. And we had two temporary employees, Jackie Briggs, graphic designer, and Cara Fernandez, an environmental educator. We wanted to thank them and recognize them. This is our agenda for the meeting. We'll have a LIISMA update. The three of us will share the update. Then a partner spotlight from New York City Parks. Then we'll have the usual roundtable announcements. And we'll take a 10-minute break. First big news we have is that we were awarded another 5-year contract for LIISMA. So our host organization, Long Island Native Plant Initiative, was awarded a 5-year contract. So we're happy about that. The first group of updates will be terrestrial, and then we'll do aquatic updates. We've recently completed 2 management plans, really a set of recommendations for Fisher's Island, invasive species at Fisher's Island, working with the Henry L. Ferguson Museum Land Trust. And we also finished a set of recommendations for the Botany Land Trust, a property called Broad Cove in Riverhead. It's a 100-acre property right on the coast that was just recently preserved. We've been doing early detection and rapid response work, focusing on the tier 2 species, our high priority species that are known to be on Long Island. These are some of them. Arthraxon is one of the priority species for us. There's 2 locations, one in Montauk and one in West Hampton. We've also been looking for salt cedar, and there's salt cedar at Cedar Beach, appropriately named. And there's also some in Conscience Bay and probably several other places too. Giant reed was observed at a Nassau County park, and we're working with Nassau County Parks to remove that one. It's a planted population, but before it spreads into the pond, we'll have that removed. Other invasives that we're finding in Nassau County: cinnamon vine, wild teasel, and wintergreen barberry. So we'll be working with landowners to control all of those infestations. This is the Arthraxon. This is illustrations by Jackie Briggs, who was with us for a while this year. It's a annual grass, grows up to about 1.5 feet tall, has these wavy shaped leaves. It's hard to make out here, but there's little hairs along each leaf. We just met recently with Reckler, one of the Reckler real estate groups in West Hampton, because there's some Arthraxon on their property next to the Gabreski Airport. And they're going to hopefully cut it every year until the seed bank is worn out. Could be for 3 to 5 years or so. And then the other population in Montauk, we're working with Suffolk County Parks to control that over a period of 5 years or so. It grows very similar to Japanese stiltgrass. So if you've seen Japanese stiltgrass take over wetlands, this does something very similar to that. We worked with Suffolk County Parks and the Third House Nature Center. They had a contract with LIISMA this year, Third House Nature Center in Montauk, to produce an interpretive sign for Montauk County Park that will inform visitors to the park about the great natural features of the park, but also let them know about Arthraxon and other invasives that are there. And one of the other sites out in Montauk we've been monitoring and surveying this at Campiro and Amsterdam Beach. We did a survey for invasive species. Montauk is one of our invasive species management complexes, the whole peninsula really. Swallowwort, whenever we see small infestations of swallowwort, we cut them so that they don't seed and spread to new areas. So we've been doing that in the pine barrens, just small infestations. And we do quite a bit of southern pine beetle surveying with DEC and state parks. And we've been doing some of that in Rocky Point and Brookhaven State Park. Perennial pepperweed is known only at West Meadow Beach and nearby Flax Pond. It hasn't been found recently anywhere else on Long Island. So we've been surveying the surrounding water bodies to see if it may have spread. At one time, we've surveyed all of Stony Brook Harbor. And just a few weeks ago, we surveyed Conscious Bay, which is a mile or two east of West Meadow Beach. Checked the shoreline, didn't find any perennial pepperweed anywhere. Wherever we're near a shoreline, we're with brackish water, we look for perennial pepperweed. And fortunately, it's still only at these two sites. All right, I was going to give an update on the aquatic work that we did.
Thanks, Bill and Abby Bisrutzig. Also, everybody joining us in person, we have bagels, we have coffee and some fruit. So at any point, feel free to walk over there and enjoy some. So our aquatic work. So with the Long Island Metro Aquatic Invasive Species Task Force, which some of you may be familiar with, we ranked over 700 water bodies across the region to assess their importance for invasive species surveying, according to things like their proximity to our existing invasive species prevention zones, the presence of threatened communities and species, and also the presence of invasive species. So coastal plain ponds come out to be some of the highest priority water bodies. That's why last year and this year, we did some surveying for them using a rake toss method to survey the underwater submerged aquatic vegetation. But a lot of what we found, if there was a problem in the pond, was small stands of Phragmites. As you probably know, it could very easily take over the whole water body. So in seeing these very small stands, less than 1,000 stems, kind of what we consider very small, especially ones that are dispersed rather than really dense. Those are ones that we would target for management. So because they're a risk to the rare ecosystems of those ponds. So we found a Blom Pond in the center of the pond, also House Pond in the center. And that's important because being in the center of the pond, we can use a method of underwater cutting. That's something we learned from the Great Lakes Phragmites Cooperative. They use these raspberry cane cutters to sever the stem under the water about 6 inches in the hopes of depriving it of oxygen. So in 2021, we did that management. Also new in 2022, we did management at Bellows Pond, another small stand that was spreading. And we used spading method, also learned from the Great Lakes, of inserting a spade 45-degree angle to sever the rhizome at each stalk of Phragmites. So that was some work that we did, and we have some results to share. There we go. So in our follow-up this year, we have some initial preliminary success that we didn't see a lot of regrowth, if any, of the ones that we did underwater cutting on. So that is a great result. We're definitely going to be looking at it again, even later this season and next season to keep monitoring these areas. But we're really pleased to see some success with this underwater cutting method. And again, these are a very particular stand. So if it's like a very huge, thousands and thousands of stems, that might not be the best method, but this works because it's a small stand and in the middle of standing water. So we're really happy to be protecting these coastal plain ponds. Yeah. So Ludwig diploides, this is, you may know this from the Potomac River, being a really bad invasive species there. And in December of 2021, with New York State DEC and the town of Brookhaven, we rapidly controlled a new emerging stand at Artist Lake in Middle Island. that was a great collaborative effort, and the result of that, we haven't seen that much regrowth from this work that we did last year in December. However, when we did a first complete survey of Artist Lake by kayak, we did find another population on that lake. So we have plans in development for its manual removal, and we're really happy that we were able to see that again before it spread all over the lake. But yeah, next slide. Knowing that Artist Lake is actually not too far from the headwaters of the Carmen's River, we wanted to survey nearby water bodies, and especially the Carmen's River, not wanting it to get in there. So we surveyed those headwaters and also Lower Lily Lake, which is in Yakking, looking for Labuya Piphides, and we didn't find any. So that's good news so far, but we had a nice day on the kayaks. Next slide. And lastly, we were happy to help the DEC Region 1 Fisheries in water chestnut polls earlier this season during New York Invasive Species Awareness Week. A great effort to engage the public, especially at Mill Pond, and to raise awareness for the need of continued control of water chestnut in these areas. Oh, here's Melody.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melody. I'm our invasive species technician, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our engagement and outreach and our partners training. So in June, we celebrated New York Invasive Species Awareness Week with 12 events, both in person and virtual. We hosted Long Island Coastal Wild Blitz, co-hosted by SeaTuck, the South Shore Estuary Reserve, New York Sea Grant, Peconic Estuary Partnership, and the Long Island Sound Study. We increased our social media presence tenfold throughout the week, reaching a grand total of 1,761 people. Our recent graphic designer, Jackie Briggs, created a promotional video as well for the event. Here pictured, Abby and Haley met with a teen nature camp at the Ernst Nature Center with the Ward Melville Heritage Organization. They discussed invasive crab species and diverse views on invasive species. Pictured here are a few photos of us engaging with the public through tabling events. We partnered with the Long Island Native Plant Initiative recently at both the Farmingdale State University Plant Sale and the Long Island Native Plant Initiative Native Plant Sale to increase awareness to the public about the effects of invasive species and the benefits of natives. And what better place to increase awareness of what to plant versus what not to plant than at a plant sale. A special thanks goes out to Andy Senesac from Cornell Cooperative Extension for lending us his weed wagon to help foster awareness of invasive and prohibited species to showcase to the public, and for all of his help throughout the year as well. We held a Spotted Lantern 5 presentation as part of the Community Science Long Island series. Community Science is a monthly educational webinar series that highlights various community science opportunities around Long Island and the importance of those projects in supporting local conservation efforts. With help from the New York State Agriculture and Markets, we helped engage citizen scientists to participate in the Adopt a Square program to assist with monitoring efforts of spotted lanternfly. We distributed SLF traps from New York State Ag and Markets to the town of Hempstead, the Third House Nature Center, the Pine Barrens Commission, and the town of Huntington. Special thanks to all who participated. In May, we assisted the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in training their seasonal technicians in both terrestrial and aquatic invasive plant ID. Together, we visited the Sayville National Wildlife Refuge and the Worthine National Wildlife Refuge, two vast sites that are packed densely with biodiversity. We helped educate their technicians in honing their plant identification skills. Recently, we met with the New York State Parks Invasive Striped team at Connecticut State Park to demonstrate the use of SAS Pro and the rake toss method for surveying aquatic invasive species. We found a patch of water chestnut on the site, unfortunately, but that is small enough to feasibly control in the nearby future. This was an important teaching highlight in our early detection rapid response efforts. All right, and lastly, we have our upcoming events. Our next events coming up are the Cornell Cooperative Extension in service. November 4th, 14th to the 18th, which brings together faculty, educators, volunteers, and industry professionals from various agricultural fields to discover the latest developments in research and practice. In addition, the next partners meeting will be held December 2nd with a location to be determined. And lastly, the Long Island Native Plant Initiative will continue to hold their native plant sale every Saturday through October at the Sisters of St. Joseph campus. There is plenty of species still up for grabs, so be sure to make your way on over to pick up some natives before the end of the season. They have a great selection of pollinator species. Thank you.
It is time for our partner spotlight. So I'll bring up Meaghan's presentation. I want to bring up.
This is for Kathleen.
Oh, Kathleen. I'm sorry, wrong person. Sorry, this is for Kathleen McCarthy. Sorry, but so let's get it.
Okay.
Just.
Yeah.
One sec while we load up Kathleen's presentation.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Anyone want a basil? And fruit.
Yep, right up above the word design.
Yeah.
We're seeing the notes too. I don't get
Oh,
that.
Yeah. And it's already, no. So is there a?
No, on the screen, it's good.
There we go.
Yep, and you gotta walk around the room,
Even in.
project.
Sorry, I'm in the shortcut.
All right, thank you for waiting, everybody. This is Kathleen McCarthy from New York City Parks. She's going to speak to us about Idlewild Park habitat restoration. Thank you, Kathleen.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. Oops, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here, and I wanted to first say we are at the Urban Field Station, which is a part of New York State Parks, and it's a collaboration between the Forest Service and New York City Parks to do research and in the urban areas. The next slide, please. Okay, so I'm talking about Idlewild Park, which is a unique forever wild preserve. The preserve is 350 acres and includes the largest tidal wetland in New York City Parks. It also has likely the largest pitch pine and American holly trees in New York City Parks natural areas. And is a nesting area for salt marsh sparrows, seaside sparrow, clapper rail, as well as the diamondback terrapin. This site has been heavily impacted by development. It's actually part of Jamaica Bay, but it's largely cut off from the bay by Kennedy Airport. The preserve is designated as forever wild and includes Hook Creek Park, which is separated by Brookville Boulevard and portions of, and it also includes portions of Brookville Park. That's Nakey Road, which also has the name of Snake Road, is Brookville Boulevard, and that really separates the tidal flushing of the two areas.
Hey, Kathleen. Sorry to interrupt. This is Polly Meaghan. We can't see your slides on the screen that are on remote.
It says for screen share.
Yeah, we see the partner spotlight with Kathleen's name and the City of Parks logo, but we aren't seeing the actual presentation.
Thanks for letting us know. How about now, Polly?
Great. Yep, now we can see that. Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, great. So you can see easily the park and Hook Creek Park separated by the road here in this slide. And in this slide, I wanted to point out that the separate flushing areas, or the where the limited movement of water from Idlewild Park through a culvert into there's Thin Creek, and Hook Creek is separate, and it goes through two separate areas to get back to Jamaica Bay. Next slide. So in addition to being impacted by the site being bisected by this road and a lot of development around it, including the airport, the JFK airport runways specifically impact the park's trees. So you can see the two runways that are the most important ones in this case. Next. So the FAA requires that no obstructions exist in the airspace assigned to takeoff and landing from the two runways I just showed you. So these are the areas that are impacted by those FAA enforced airspace and the height restrictions assigned to them. Luckily, there's a large portion of the park that's wetland that isn't impacted because it never even gets to that height. But there is quite a significant amount of the upland that is impacted. So the minimum tree height is 21.9 feet and the maximum is 77. So as the runways, as you move away from the runways, the height restriction increases so we can have larger trees at the far end of this chevron. So Idlewild Park has seen a lot of restoration since 97. In 97, there was a very large restoration that was accompanied by work done to put a trunk sewer through the park. And New York City parks have to or are required to accommodate a lot of infrastructure from New York City. The majority of them are related to stormwater. This is odd because it's related to the airport, this project and this restriction, which is something we really have never dealt with before. But there have been a lot of restorations, and the 97 restoration is the one that brought in those pitch pines and holly. Next slide, please. So the strategy for the tree canopy compliance is that we remove invasive trees, tree of heaven, black locust, and mulberry. We prune native trees, eastern cottonwood, oaks, birch, juniper, and pines whenever possible. And we want to establish a scrub shrub in areas with low height limits and plant trees with mature heights below the airspace. And part of our restoration best practices are to limit pruning and removals from April 1st through September 30th to accommodate bird nesting. And when we, and to accommodate leaving snags, we leave the dead trees. If they're above the height, we try to prune them if at all possible. And we also create additional standing dead trees. In particular, Ailanthus, which the birds seem to love. We kill the tree, we prune the trees to the right height and then kill them to create more habitat. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about one specific area and species that we have been dealing with for the past 6 years. So there was a big locust grove in that red area. That area was actually not part of the formal 96, 97 restoration, but the aerials show us that it was pretty much bare sand at the time. I don't know exactly why, whether they used it as staging or whatever, but I don't know those exact reasons. But it was pretty much bare sand in 96, and it grew to a fairly dense locust grove. The locusts grow to between 50 and 75 feet. And the limit there is, I think, 30 to 45 feet. So although some people do not consider the black locust invasive, we parks do. It's a clonal species. It tends to take over. And in this case, the height was just not feasible to keep pruning and allow it to grow. So next slide, please. So this is the locust grove in the winter of 2017-18. What you're seeing is the small saplings we started removing first. And then next slide, please. This is the third year of resprout removal. We did have a bit of a slowdown in the resprout removals because of COVID, but this shows you the density. It can really be significant, and it pretty much means we can't replant. Until this is dealt with, we can't replant with the species, the shrub species that we want there, which for the most part, we're focusing on pitch pine, not pitch pine, I'm sorry, Prunus maritima and bayberry in these very sandy areas. Next. So one thing we found in trying different things is that if you high stump the black locust and then you allow it to regrow and you foliar herbicide the regrowth, the kind of little lollipop regrowth, then later flush cut and treat the bottom with herbicide, it works better than flush cutting and treating alone. However, it only works when there's a herbaceous layer on the ground. If the soil is open to the sun, the resprouts will grow aggressively. But even so, it's still a 3 to 5 year project to eliminate the root system. Next slide. So this is my crew leader gave me this is the pretty much exact removal procedure. You high stump in the late winter, spring, let it regrow. And you want to keep it well vegetated around the on that ground surface, even if it ends up just being mugwort, don't take it out yet. Between September and October, sorry, I did that wrong. Because in September, October, you're supposed to spray the spray the foliar, and then later in the season, a little later, when it when it dies, when the vegetation dies, you can flush cut it and treat it. If you irrigate the area, you get locust seedlings. And we used an organic herbicide called Axe for seedlings that are little tiny seedlings of a number of different invasive species that are growing in shady areas or in areas that were where things were removed, but we're getting seedlings back. Next slide. The other thing that we found, which is related to the irrigation or the watering, is we absolutely have to water to establish this shrub layer. The shrub layer is slow growing. The shrubs are not accommodated to this very sandy, dry soil. And so we have a fairly elaborate irrigation system that brings water from fire hydrants as far as 1,000 feet away. You can play that video on the right. That's our sprinkler system. Oh, it's not like, well, I tried.
Okay, so
You can see the sprinklers. In any case, this is a small portion of what we're doing there in this one area with a very low height restriction, trying to establish a maritime scrub shrub area, which is actually pretty difficult because of the nature of the established invasive herbaceous layer on the ground and the slow growing nature of the shrubs that we plant. Any questions? Sorry, the next slide just says any questions.
oh,
Oh, it took that long to load up, I guess.
Offering.
Questions?
Yeah. If anybody online has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Is Edgewater Park and Midland trails that you can walk?
Yeah. I mean, there's 3 trails. One is like stone, crushed stone. The other 2 are just mulch trails. And then we have a big trail that is actually for the construction vehicles, but it ends up being a sandy trail. So yeah, you can get around pretty easily. There we have a partner called the Eastern Queens Alliance who has gotten money from various sources to improve that trail network. And so we are working on designing that now with them.
Very cool. Yeah, I live nearby, but I never-
Oh, yeah, it's really beautiful. And it's a hot spot for birds on eBird. So it's a really significant area, and we're trying to do this major restoration without affecting the significant qualities of the site.
So regarding the black locust technique, you say cut high stump in late winter and spring.
Yeah.
And then let it regrow. Now, do you let it the shoots regrow a full year, or do you treat it like later that year?
We treat it later that year. I don't know why I had it wrong on the slides. Maybe I cut out something from Peter's email that was significant and I didn't see it. But yeah, we spray later that year and then we cut stump probably in the winter, again, as we did originally.
Yeah, you can cut stump up till Christmas pretty much. So you can get fairly late in the season, so you could spray today and do the cut stump at Christmas, and then it's getting 2 doses of herbicide.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you for the clarification. All right,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Let's do a little bit behind, but not too bad. Let's do roundtable announcements. We'll start in the room here in person. And if you can, try to keep it to about a minute. If you have something more to say, we'll have space at the end, I believe. So roundtable announcements, about a minute or so.
People online will accept this.
All right, who wants to go first?
I think it's me.
Yeah, I guess it is me. Hi, everyone. It's Yuri from New York State Parks. So we are knee deep in southern pine beetle control and suppression and surveying. We recently had DEC's contractor come down to Naja State Park and cut down roughly 3,200 infested pine trees and buffer trees. We're hoping this can slow down the invasion at Naja. It's not looking great. Definitely going to have to follow up years, cut a lot earlier and survey earlier. We also during the initial talks, it was brought up the water chestnut at Connecticut, that small infestation is being treated as we speak.
Yeah.
So the strike team is out there today pulling it all up. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, Robert Moses State Park, after the FIMP project on Democrat Point. This year we revisited it for Asiatic sand sedge, and we found very little, which is nice. Any of the sand sedge that has resprouted this year has been taken care of, so it's looking nice and that's all I got.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tim Wenskis. I'm the regional forester for DEC here in New York City. So my territory is the 5 boroughs. Just a couple things. New York City, especially Staten Island, is the epicenter of the spotted lanternfly in New York State. We're not doing a whole lot of management, but we're certainly doing a lot of phone calls and outreach. A lot of response to all that, even though Ag and Market is the lead agency on that, it's still spilling over onto us because we're the people that they see every day. So that's taken up a bunch of time. We're slowly watching Japanese stiltgrass consume several of our properties. We recently had a ban on glyphosate use on state lands, which has kind of slowed down our ability to respond to it. Although if you weed whack it at just the right time, it's not going to come back because it's an annual. But that then means you need to have a lot of labor to do a lot of weed whacking and, you know, dozens of acres of woods. We're going to continue, hopefully over the winter, some of the calorie pear treatment. Staten Island is also the epicenter of New York State's infestation of calorie pear, and we'll be working on that over the winter, I hope. And last thing, since Yuri brought it up, New York City Parks is working on, and has been for many years, Asiatic sand sedge, both in the Rockaways and on the west shore of Staten Island. That's it.
Thank you. Announcements. Let's go to the room, the number room. Let's go virtual. Let's see. Yeah, we go one by one. We'll call out everyone's name, and if you can unmute and if you have an announcement. So if this works.
Alan, you're first on the list. You have anything to share? And we sent that is after Alan.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Andy.
Oh, okay, I just have one thing to talk about. I've been working with the Inlet Pond Park in Greenport, which is a Suffolk County park that's managed by the North Fork Audubon Society. And we've been surveying, it's a heavily invaded park with lots of different invasive species, but privet species is one of the primary ones. So we're in the midst of inventorying and removing a lot of that, but we are in a great need of a management plan. So if we could get the LIISMA folks to come out and visit, I would really love that. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Andy. We'll talk to you. That sounds interesting.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, next up we have Ashley Morris, and after that, Jennifer Ballas. Either of you have anything to share?
Hi, yeah, it's Ashley. We just kind of finished up our field season here in Region 1 DEC. I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for Suffolk and Nassau. It's been really good to hear other people's updates about some of the things people have found, especially new water chestnut infestations. Is that something we've been trying to get a better handle on, since some of our larger infestations have management plans in place. And so now we're trying to focus on some of the smaller ones and making sure that it doesn't spread any further than it has. Same thing for Ludwigia. I'm sure that we'll be able to make some plans with LIISMA about what we're seeing with our peconic treatment as well, since that has wrapped up, but is going to continue for the next 2 years and then monitoring for another 2 years after that. But we've seen some pretty good die-off of the Ludwigia that we were able to treat with an herbicide. But obviously there are still some patches that are untreated in the peconic, and so we're like, the follow-ups are definitely needed. And there's a lot of information about that on the DEC's website.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you have anything to share? And Kathy McShane, you would be next. I don't see any activity there. Maureen Dunn, you're next on the list.
Yeah, hi, Maureen Dunn from CTUC. I don't have an update on our Connecticut invasive removal, but we did have a Treats for Tribs grant that is ending at the end of this year. And that riparian restoration is finished, and we're just putting up some educational placards and things like that. And I came to the aquatic invasive talk, so thank you for allowing me to come. Thanks.
Of course. May Wu, next on the list, and then Mitchell.
Should I go?
Sure.
Okay, cool. This is Mitch O'Neill from the New York Natural Heritage Program, the IMAP Invasives team. It's been great hearing about all the cool work going on in Long Island, so thanks everyone who's been sharing. A couple quick things from me. I was taking a look at the data we have in IMAP Invasives for Long Island so far, just from this year. It looks like there's about 500 records of presence and not detected. Some of the most common species or commonly reported species are spotted lanternfly, tree of heaven, Asiatic sand sedge, southern pine beetle, beech leaf disease, and Phragmites. So thanks to everyone who's helping improve our distribution information for those species and for other species as well. And I just wanted to put in a reminder for anyone who's been doing invasive species survey work, please make sure to get your data in to IMAP Invasives if you can. And a thank you to LIISMA for helping promote the Grid Square project to get people checking for spotted lanternfly and tree of heaven in the areas outside of the epicenter, so the areas where we need more information on what's going on. And then my last thing was just to mention that we have our monthly webinar series at the New York IMAP Invasives, and it's on the afternoon after the PRISM call that happens each month, which is starting up again in September. So it's the last Wednesday of each month. And our webinar is at 1 p.m. following the 11 a.m. PRISM call. And so our September 28th webinar is about new features in IMAP invasives from this year. So that includes more options in the filter tool, options for viewing iNaturalist data right in IMAP invasives, a new time slider tool, and more. So I encourage people to consider registering for that, and I'll put a link in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitchell. I'm excited about the time slider tool. I'll have to check that out. Next up, Noah Talamia, and then Polly Wigand.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Dylan Calamia. I'm the new assistant landscape ecologist on the Sisters of St. Joseph property in Brentwood. I just want to provide a brief update. We have identified southern pine beetle in 34 host and barrier trees around, which we will be culling. They encompass about 4 acres of the 212 that we have here. And we have also located spotted lanternfly and ailanthus on around 5 acres, mostly within the margins of that forested area that we have been slowly harvesting as well when time allows.
Thanks for the update. Polly, do you have anything to share?
Sure. Sabrina Cohn will give our update on the Central Pine Barren activities, but I will share about LIIMPI is that we had successful plant sale last weekend, and we continue to have an abundance of plants. So if you're interested in any milkweeds, those we're really looking to get into the ground. They don't overwinter well in the hoop house or high tunnels. And then we also have a significant abundance of Iva, marsh elder, and seaside goldenrod. If anybody has a need for any restoration projects, we also have a grant application on our website that you can apply for a request for donations of plant materials for restoration.
Thank you.
So, and I guess just one last thing too is that within our LIISMA contract, we do provide a clause in there that we do donate plant materials for restoration. So please consider that grant application as part of that when you're doing your restoration work.
Yes, definitely a good thing to mention. Next on the list is Rob Landreau and then Robert Thacker.
Hi, everyone. Rob Landreau here with the Friends of Hempstead Plains. This summer, we've really been concentrating on woody growth removal. This winter, we'll be stump cutting a lot of cherries and crab apples that have really taken over our highest quality areas at the plains. And then on top of that, we're in our second year of a kind of organized Chinese bush clover removal. We've been doing combinations of mowings and large scale cuttings around flowering and seed time. It's going to be a long-term project and the successes are kind of up in the air, but we feel with the use of volunteers, we've had a really good success covering a vast majority of the preserve last year. So we're doing the same again this year. And then at the town of Hempstead, we this past winter removed a lot of invasive within our Lido Preserve, which had become overgrown with mostly mugwort and like oriental bittersweet for the most part. So a lot of that was pulled out and is ready for plantings. So I'm actually meeting with LIIMPI next week to see about some planting ideas and how we could restore that preserve and kind of set it up for the next several years, because it became a very overgrown and was actually kind of doing us a disservice than a service. So it's a little bare now, so we want to prevent erosion and get some plants in the ground this fall. And that's kind of what we're working on. We're also doing the Mayor's Monarch Pledge with the town of Hempstead. And with that comes with a lot of native plantings and invasive removals to, push pollinator gardens and other native growth. So if anyone has available volunteers or want to hook up, we're definitely trying to get more outreach in Nassau County, especially the South Shore. So any ideas or anyone in the area, happy to chat and collaborate.
Great. Yeah, great to hear about that restoration work. And thanks for helping us with setting up some spotted lanternfly traps too.
Yes.
Next on the list is Robert Thacker. And after that, Sawad Karim.
Hi, this is Bob Thacker over at Stony Brook University. And We had a great team this summer of 3 undergrads working with the DEC to educate the public on aquatic invasive species. We just found out that we're funded again for next summer to hire another team of undergrads to do that. And they're basically stationed at different boat ramps to educate people on the spread of aquatic invasive species through their boats and things like that. They were also able to help out Ashley with a bunch of survey projects. So we're excited to have another team to help do that next summer. And I also wanted to point out that we have a lot of student organizations on campus that are interested in environmental projects. So if y'all have a project where you could use a bunch of student helpers, please let me know and we can get the word out to some of the student groups on campus.
Great, that would be awesome. Thank you. Yep.
Hi, so I'm one of those student helpers for Dr. Thacker. Funny enough, got the invitation from him through a Slack chat and such. But yeah, I'm part of his lab and just looking into a wide variety of different invertebrates within Long Island Sound and such, and going through like the DNA sequencing each done with other undergrad students. Yeah, just came by, wanted to check things out because yeah, y'all are really cool. Just want to say that. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Great to meet you and welcome. Next we have Tom Elgire and then Tom Mayo.
Good morning, I'm Tom Elgire, New York State Invasive Species Coordinator, New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. I know others have mentioned SLF. Just want to give a quick update for Nassau and Suffolk County primarily. We have had populations confirmed and kind of spread across the island. The Melville, Farmingdale area, there's been several confirmed reports there up into Huntington Township. There's some in the Bohemia, Shirley area, primarily focused around the MacArthur Airport. And then outside of the LIISMA area, we have new counties, including Erie County, and we're confirming some other reports in other new counties. Some of that work's ongoing today, just started in the last few days. So the map will be changing. I think we're up to 15 confirmed counties at this point. By the end of the month, we may be adding a few more. That's really all I have for Spotted Lanternfly. I appreciate all the help with the Claim a Grid Square program. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. And also with the the trapping, getting the traps out and getting that trapping data back is important. So we know what's going on with those traps. As far as the Claim a Grid Square program that Mitch was just talking about, I know we just recently had one of the webinars that we've been holding periodically since the program began. And yesterday we had 150 attendees. There's definitely a lot of interest there, and I appreciate you promoting the program. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for all your work with Spotted Lanternfly, Tom. We have Tom Mayo, I believe. Sorry you were kept in the waiting room for so long. My bad.
That's right. It's my fault for not registering. I piggybacked on Tom's registration. So not much to add on top of what Tom said. As far as Asian longhorn beetle goes, we do have 14 infested trees that are standing, but they're all within the existing quarantine area right in the heart of it. So nothing too shocking there. So that's pretty much it.
Okay.
I got one more thing.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, this is Tim Wenskis again. Just one final New York City update. Beach leaf disease, since somebody else mentioned it. We have documented the first known occurrence on Staten Island and in Brooklyn this year. So that's 4 of the 5 boroughs that have it. Manhattan is the only place in the city that we have not found it yet. And that's probably because we're not looking in the right spots. So just thought I would share that with you. Pay
They
attention.
haven't found it
Pay
in
attention to
Manhattan?
beach disease.
Oh,
What was that comment?
interesting. Sorry, I didn't realize I was unmuted.
Oh,
No worries.
okay. One last person to hear from, Victoria O'Neill.
Hi, just here to listen. I don't have any updates.
Okay, thank you.
I can give an update on the Central Pine Barrens Commission if you
Oh,
like.
yeah, sorry, Sabrina.
No worries. We've been really busy with southern pine beetle. It's really blowing up this season, as Yuri mentioned as well. We've been working closely with DEC on monitoring as well as cutting infested trees. Two of the main hotspots we've been focused on right now are Fireman's Field and Ridge. We've recently found an infestation pushing 1,000 trees, and many, maybe like 60, at least 60% of those were stage 1's early attack, still green trees. So it's moving really quickly through there, as well as Sarnoff State Pine Barrens Preserve. We found up until this season, it hasn't been found there, but it's really spotting up in there as well. A lot of small infestations popping up. We've been also focusing on spotted lanternfly. Abby gave us two circle traps courtesy of Ag and Markets that we decided to put at the Hampton Bays and West Hampton transfer stations, as we've been continuously surveying there for spotted lanternfly. And then we also have ongoing work with miscanthus removal in some grasslands on state land. And we also are continuing to focus on our encroachment restoration and easement properties, mainly focusing on Japanese stiltgrass there and keeping that at bay. And the last thing I wanted to mention too is on the topic of southern pine beetle, we have an upcoming online workshop and field day, mainly focused for land managers in the New England area that haven't had as much experience with managing southern pine beetle. It's kind of more of an introduction for them to set up their own preventative southern pine beetle programs. But if you know anyone that's interested in learning more about southern pine beetle, feel free to point them in our direction. I can put the Zoom registration in the chat for anybody that's interested.
That's on
And
October
that's
6th, right? That workshop? October 6th.
Yep, on October 6th, and then the field day is on October 27th.
Cool. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. I would like to introduce Meaghan McCormack, who is here in person with us. Meaghan is a marine zoologist with the New York Natural Heritage Program and New York State DEC Division of Marine Resources. Meaghan is from Long Island and holds a BS in biology from Adelphi University and MS in Marine Affairs and Policy from the University of Miami, and a PhD from Texas State University in Aquatic Resources and Integrative Biology. Please welcome Meaghan.
Can everyone on Zoom see this correct screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
And if you can't hear anything, just let us know. All right.
Okay, great. Thank you guys for having me. You're gonna advance, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'm with the New York Natural Heritage Program. It's part of a network of programs in every state. We deal mostly with rare species and maintaining biodiversity by following NatureServe methodologies for conservation ranking. But we also have a group, Mitchell's on the call, with IMAP Invasives. And my position specifically is affiliation between SUNY ESF and New York State DEC Division of Marine Resources. Okay, so I'm going to go over first just kind of some of the work we've been doing at Division of Marine Resources to facilitate reporting of non-native species. And then I'm going to go into a tool that we worked on with LIISMA this past year on ID cards for non-native species. So Emily Runnels held this position before me, and she really started spearheading our invasive species awareness in the marine realm. So if you go to the DEC website for marine invasive species, she helped create that website.
She also held a workshop back in 2019 on non-native species. And she started to recognize that we didn't have marine species in IMAP invasives, and that was something we wanted to address. So she started compiling a list of species that potentially we could have here. So I started attending the Northeast Aquatic Nuisance Species Panel, as well as LIISMA meetings, and then the Long Island Metro Aquatic Invasive Species Task Force. And the department really had a need to help facilitate reporting. So maybe even in our own surveys at Division of Marine Resources, folks weren't sure what to do when they found a non-native species. So my first dealing was really with non-native crabs. So on Long Island, we have 3 marine non-native species. The first, oldest or established species is the green crab. And those initial reports in New York date back to the 1800s. A more recent is the Asian shore crab. So that we've had since the early 90s in Long Island Sound. And then kind of the most important for management today is the mitten crab, which is an anadromous species. So it will be most of its lifespan in the Hudson River and will come down to estuarine waters to spawn. And that first report was from the Hudson River in 2009. And we're still dealing with reports of mitten crabs. So really the first thing I noticed was there was kind of a disconnect between a lot of the information we had on these species and then the larger invasive species network with DEC. So I was getting a lot of reports from National Park Service and Fire Island National Seashore about Asian shore crabs. And I was happy to receive them, but I was wondering why folks were so concerned about them because they're very well established throughout Long Island. And I realized that a lot of our information was out of date. So on the website, it kind of said they were only in very Western Long Island Sound and Hudson River area. But really, this is a pretty well-established species. We're still interested in the distribution of it. So I went through kind of a 10-year backlog of information from the DEC surveys to see where we were finding them. So I was able to update the map, which is what you're seeing on the right now. So I'm sure they're much more distributed than what the map is showing. This is mostly reflective of where we have survey work for the state. But at least now we know if you go on the website, you can see that it's pretty well along the north and south shore of Long Island. So this opened up some interesting conversations about what to do when you find these crabs. So the official response from the DEC was all 3 non-native crabs shouldn't be returned to the water in a free living state. There's some nuances with this because Asian shore crabs and mitten crabs are both prohibited species, but the green crab is a regulated species. So they can be sold, not in a free living state, but on Long Island, we do have people use them for bait, fishermen. So that's okay as long as they're already dead. And public reports, when I get them for what people should do with them, the recommendation is blunt force trauma to not return the crabs to the water. If possible, mitten crabs, we're asking that they be frozen or stored in ethanol because the Smithsonian is doing genetic work. And they would appreciate samples to understand the spread. So in communicating all this information, I have been getting more reports than when I first started the job, which is good. Sometimes they're strange. So this one came from, they found these crabs on their private property just north of New Paltz. They thought it was an invasive species. They're very concerned. And then I'm looking at the photos and these look like native marine crabs, probably in this Jonah or rock crabs. But to someone from New Paltz, they looked really concerning. I'm guessing that these were probably left from someone's lunch or something, because I don't think that they could make it that far on their own. This one too, I think is a positive result of having more press releases and asking people to report species. But I got a very concerned public report saying that they found hundreds of mitten crabs in Great South Bay and also hundreds of Asian shore crabs. And it turned out to be spider crabs and lady crabs, but I'm happy to receive these from the public. Want to go through kind of within the last year or so, our mitten crab reports. So we had an adult mitten crab in Huntington Harbor. kind of last March. Then in September, we had juveniles found from a professor in Hempstead Bay, Roslyn. The adult last fall in Smithtown was kind of very close to our office in Kings Park, and that's been the farthest east that we've had a report. Unfortunately, they just got a picture of the crab. They weren't able to capture it. Then this year, we have reports of juveniles and fight nets from various counties. The juveniles are really tough to ID, especially if you're out doing a regular survey. I've gotten a lot of times where people would send me a photo afterwards, but they didn't hold the crab just in case, and it did turn out to be a mitten crab. So if you have a question about it, maybe if you could hold on to it till it's confirmed or not, that would be beneficial. Then we had a report recently from Mamaroneck in Westchester. It was from someone doing an EIS statement, and again, they didn't capture the crab, but they saw several adults, which is concerning to see more than one. But this is the time that we'd expect them to be kind of moving into estuarine waters, the adults. So I did contact not just Region 3 DEC, but all other partners that might be working in the area, doing any kind of field work to be on the lookout for those. So this next one just gives you general monitoring guidelines for when to look for mitten crabs. So now late summer, fall is when they're going to be moving downstream. Winter, they're going to be in marine waters, and especially because we don't have survey work like extending into the winter, this is a tough time for reporting. And then spring is another important time to be when they're moving in the reverse back upriver. So this is from IMAP, is showing the records that we have so far. So anything in pink is not confirmed on IMAP yet. But this one kind of in the middle of the island is what I was talking about, the adult from Smithtown. So that's the furthest east we found. But this area right kind of here is where I'm concerned about now, with them coming into Long Island Sound throughout the fall. All right, so I'm gonna briefly go over some other non-natives that we found. This guy is a rock pool shrimp. They're very distinctive. They're bigger than our native shrimp. And on their legs, they have this distinctive banding that's like blue and orange. So they're really easy to ID. I thought I saw one last year when I was doing some other work for Heritage on Fisher's Island. So I wanted to go back to see. And I found them everywhere when I just went looking this year. So they can be in tide pools. They're also, I found them beach seining. And definitely, I mean, from the limited survey work I did, I got a lot more of them than native shrimp species. So I don't think anywhere else in Long Island Sound, at least from my naturalist, we've found them. But if you're in the area, it's something that's distinctive that you could see if you're in marine environments. All right, so this is the last one. This is like kind of just an interesting case, only in the last few weeks. This is a species that was on our list that could be potentially new to the area due to climate change. It's typically only found as north as Virginia. But I got a call last week from Dr. Jim Carlton, who worked with LIISMA and I on the invasive species cards that I'll talk about next. So he found a bunch of them in Mystic River, Connecticut. There have been a few sporadic cases, one in Brooklyn in the past few years, and then one in Rhode Island. But we hadn't really seen them in large numbers. So he wanted people to keep a lookout for them. So right after that, I kind of emailed just people at my office, say like, while you're out, keep a lookout for this anemone. It's very pretty, but small. And I think it kind of retracts the tentacles, so it becomes really difficult to see. So that was maybe on Friday, and then Monday, some of my colleagues went diving and both of them found it in Shinnecock Bay. So I think it's something that's probably been here that we're just not seeing. You can see it without scuba diving. It likes to biofoul in marinas. So just looking over the dock, you might see it. So we're going to try to increase surveillance of this. I'm kind of, if people have other folks that they think would be interested, between the dive community and then also some scientific divers from Stony Brook, I think we could get a better understanding of where it is. And then Dr. Carlton thinks based on the numbers we found, it might be overwintering. We're not sure yet though. So this is something we want to keep an eye on. There's also a PhD student at Ohio State that has asked me if we do get samples, he can pay for shipping. He's doing phylogenetics on the species and would be interested in the spread in the Northeast. Oh, there's one more I forgot. Just interesting stuff about round goby expansion. So colleagues at Region 3 recently published a paper on round goby in the Hudson River. So it's been moving, kind of marching eastward through the canal system. It made it to the Hudson River. And then last year they found 112 round gobies between Albany and Poughkeepsie. So they recently had a bulk upload of all their information to IMAP. So IMAP should be up to date with round goby distributions. But we do have funding proposal in to do eDNA work for round goby detections, and then also salinity tolerances. So typically we don't think it can make it into estuarine, really truly estuarine environments. But a lot of the work on the species have been done in the Baltic region. So we're not sure how those studies are comparable. So we are interested in how far south into the Hudson can this species go. So here it is. It kind of started in the Great Lakes and it's been moving east. So now we have all the way down to New Falls, which is our latest detections. Some of the press releases that we've had recently, we haven't had any clinging jellyfish reports. These are small jellyfish that sting. I've heard the sting is pretty bad, but you have to kind of be in a seagrass area where there's vegetation. So I don't think we'd have much issue like on our barrier beaches. But they were concerned in Rhode Island area. So we had a press release about this species. We can go to the second slide. We've also had press releases. I've not confirmed that it's Daisy. Maybe Steve can speak to that later. But a lot of reports from homeowners on Fire Island that there's decaying algae and it really smells really terrible. And what can we do about it? So DEC isn't, we're not in a position to go physically remove it. I know they've done some removals on state parks with algae, particularly, now I can't remember, Hexter dealt with this a lot. So we just released it that, you know, we're not going to be doing it. They have to contact their local municipalities. It could become an issue with hydrogen sulfide release irritation of breathing that in all the time. But I'm not particularly sure what species this was. We were thinking because of the warm weather and Daisy doesn't do that good with warm conditions that it might have been a die-off of Daisy, but from the photos, it also seemed like there was native algae in there too, so. All right, so I'm gonna switch now to the recent project that we worked on with Long Island Metro Aquatic Invasive Species Task Force. So when we went to the New York invasive species meeting in person last year, kind of facilitated the development of 3 training groups. So Steve Pearson leads these groups. He couldn't be on the call today, but we kind of came up with 3 working groups last year, 1 for training and development, 1 for education and outreach, and then 1 for water body prioritization. And the 2 that kind of ended up kind of merging and dealt with marine species were the training and the education and outreach. So for training, we mostly worked on developing these non-native ID cards. And then education and outreach, we were working on a white paper on marine invasives that was led by the LIISMA team. So I first hosted a meeting with all of our field survey crew at Division of Marine Resources to see, like, you know, what was our manpower? Could we have like dedicated marine invasive survey work? And the answer right now was no, we can't. But there was a real opportunity to have more reporting for folks that are already out there in the field doing their regular survey work. But they discussed that there was a need to have kind of a cheat sheet about what to look for, because they're, you know, dealing with large seines and they're dealing with their focal species that they're targeting. So to help kind of know what they should be on the lookout for. So that's how we decided to work on these non-native ID cards. So Dr. Jim Carlton helped us out a lot with this. He's a retired professor from Williams College, whose focus is on marine non-native species. And he helped us kind of narrow down a large list that I had made to focus on species that might be most important for immediate management. So we came up with this kind of scheme of species level 1 to 4. So 1 would be they're the newest invaders to our region. We might have an ability to still manage for that species. They're not as well established. The second were climate change indicator species. So I'm kind of calling these neo-natives. So they might be moving northward due to climate change. The third was a pest or non-native species that was important for human significance, and that clinging jellyfish was one of the examples of those. And then the last are well-established older invaders that we still might want to know about their distribution, but there's not much that we could do in terms of management. So these are like Asian shore crabs and European green crabs. And I think I mentioned earlier, Jacqueline Briggs was a graphic designer from LIISMA who really helped us make these look professional. So these, I just pulled a few examples of front and back of cards, and we can get a PDF version to you. We're still working on getting them printed, but if anyone's interested in a PDF, we have that. So we've gone through level 1 and 2 species. So it's about how many, 14 or 15 species. And they span a range. We have algae, crustaceans, fish, bryozoans, tunicates, and then the one anemone. So included in these are cards about how to take photos. We're really, with the exception of maybe the mitten crab and this new anemone, the focus is not needing to collect the specimen, but more take a photo and get it out of the water where it can't go back to impact anything else. So we have tips on how to take photographs, tips about if you were going to preserve it, how you should do that. And then we use the same language that they use from DEC to talk about what to do in terms of disposal. So if you are near a place where they have, near a boat ramp or something where they have those designated areas for non-native species, that's what you would do with it, with the exception of prohibited species like the mitten crab. And we're also using IMAP invasives as our main reporting tool. But that extra level of this other email, the isinfo@dec.ny.gov, is for high priority things that we'd want, so especially mitten crabs. So each species on the left is what it would look like on the front of the card, and on the back of the card is information on what you want to not confuse it with. So the front gives you, this species name, common name, some characteristics to help identify it, where you could look for it. This macroalgae is in the shallow subtitle. Notes generally where it came from, if we know the origins. And then most of these marine species aren't ranked, but we wanted to include the New York State invasive species tier ranking for both LIISMA region and for Lower Hudson. And these are things that we could adapt as we go on. And then the back of the card is, especially for algae, there's lots of stuff that can look really similar. So we want to include species that are native, that you might want to follow up and make sure that it's not a native species. So our continuing work is looking to print these cards. I do want to also work on making all the level 3 and 4 species ID cards as well. We're working on revising the Long Island Metro aquatic invasive species focal list. So before there were marine invasives on there, but there are more like well-established invaders that maybe we don't want to have as our major management focal priority list. Our IMAP team is working on getting all those marine species into IMAP. So right now, I think all of the non-native crabs are, but some of these other ones aren't. So that should be up soon. So if you do have a report, you can upload it directly to IMAP. In the future, we hope to have more targeted survey work. Specifically, I've talked to our department about doing these rapid assessment surveys where you pick certain marinas or docks that you can revisit every year. And that's something that if we have more staff or more flexibility in schedules, we could implement for next year. And then we're still trying to streamline reporting. So right now I have staff sending me things from survey work kind of after the season for everything that's not a high priority. So Asian shore crabs and European green crabs, they'll send me in a bulk every season, but higher priority items they'll send right away if they find something. And then also just getting information to the public. welcome people's input about this. I'm trying to use IMAP Invasives because that seems like the most concise thing to do, but sometimes it's difficult for, the public has already emailed me something and then I ask them to make an account on a separate thing and I get a lot of pushback about that. So, I mean, if I have time, I don't mind making the record myself, but just kind of, I guess, how you deal with public interactions about making more accounts to upload more information. But that's all I have, so happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Any questions? And if anybody online, if you look at questions in the chat, feel free to.
Online questions.
That should be it.
Meaghan, what's the plan for printing cards, or how will they be bound together?
Well, we looked into some options, right? There one of those kind of ring options, and it'll be waterproof, so you could take it in the field, and then the ring is good if we can add more cards. But yeah, we should talk about which best way to fund that, and if we should go through DC or.
Mitch O'Neill has a comment / question. If you want to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Do you want me to ask it? I couldn't hear what you said.
Oh, Mitch says no, think people can hear him. I heard somebody.
That was Mitchell. That was somebody.
It wasn't Mitch.
It wasn't Mitchell. It was somebody.
Well, Mitch, you gotta type your question.
They can type it in, or we might be able to unmute them too.
And someone said they caught a lionfish last week.
I've been hearing about that.
Tom may have caught a lion. You know, where, Tom?
How about now?
Yes, hear you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I was just thinking, well, first of all, thanks, Meaghan, for that great presentation and for your work to get our database to better represent marine species in particular. And for that last comment about, yeah, some people, they don't want to create accounts. That's something we deal with too. I did want to make sure you knew about, we have like a public report form on our website. So basically, like, people have two options. They can create an account and report it via the app or whatever, and that's the preferred option. But there's also the option of they can fill out our Survey 123 form, which is like a web form. So they just put in the information, pick out the spot where they found the species, and hopefully upload a picture and put in their information so we can contact them. It does still require an extra step from them, like they have to go report it somewhere after they think they've already given you all the information you need. But they at least don't have to create an account. So it's kind of like a one-step process, which those sorts of people who don't want to make an account are sometimes fine with submitting to the public report form.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. I have seen people use that tool, but that's a good thing. I can be like, this is an intermediate step that you can use the public reporting tool if you don't want to make an account.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Something I mentioned, Shinnecock Bay was where.
Yeah, that's where we get most tropicals come up. So that's kind of, yeah, also hotspot for diving, so.
Yeah, Kathleen also said a lot of tropical species lined up at Shinnecock has been occurring for many years. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or chat. And maybe put the link for the public report form in the chat. Thank you.
I had just a comment. This is Vicky O'Neill.
Hi.
Hi. I just want to say to Meaghan, the Day in the Life programs are starting to occur again late September throughout October on Long Island. The Day in the Life of the Nisququag River program is October 7th. And while it's students, so you got to take their data and observation with a grain of salt. There are going to be, over 100 students on the Nisqually River on the October 7th, biological sampling and water quality sampling. So it just might be something to think about if there is a target species, even just one like Chinese mitten crab. We could ask the program leaders to see if they could ask the teachers to look out for those species. Because students will be from the mouth of the Nisqually River up to the headwaters on the 7th.
That's good idea. I'll have to think about, mitten crab might be the best idea, but I'll get in touch with you about that.
Okay, yep.
Oh, Tom offers to share his screen to show the lionfish.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So catch.
I might have to promote you. Unless you can just share your screen.
Always be a co-host.
The host is disabled sharing.
Okay, you should be able to get.
Hang on a sec. There he is.
What's the size on that?
Only about 2 inches. It's the first one I caught in probably 10 years. It's been a while since I saw any.
How big do they get? That looks like a young one.
I really don't think they can live in New York, but I've seen them at least 15 inches or so.
Yeah.
Down south.
Interesting.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Can't mistake it for anything else. Sit in on the question. Steve has a BS in botany and an MS in biology, specializing in marine botany and ecology from the University of Rhode Island. He's been employed by Cornell Cooperative Extension since 2000, working with the Habitat Restoration Program. Steve's work focuses primarily on shoreline and tidal wetland and eelgrass restoration and monitoring. Steve's experience with marine microalgae has him involved in supporting the bird seaweed aquaculture industry in New York. Please welcome Steve Schott.
All right, let me share my screen. Oop. Everybody see my screen?
Yes.
And can hear me clearly?
Yep.
Nope. I'm just making sure I have everything in the background off because our connections Optimum has been working on our lines on our road. So that's the so when I go scuba diving with coworkers, and we do a lot of diving primarily in eelgrass meadows. Of course, macroalgae are ubiquitous. Get ahead of myself. So sites like that, why is that? Oh, that's why. Groupings like this are pretty common. It's funny because I'm always asked, did you see that puffer? Did you see that lobster? Did you see that school of, striped bass? And I have to say no, because I'm never looking at the animals. I'm always looking at the plants. So I am definitely a seaweed nerd. Which works with my position with Cornell. So as Bill has introduced me, I am a marine botany habitat restoration specialist. Although my work for Cornell primarily revolves around eelgrass restoration and monitoring, I've been getting back to my roots with seaweeds with the passage of the kelp bill in New York and the interest in shellfish aquaculturists on Long Island to grow sugar kelp for now and hopefully other species in the future. So today I'm going to talk to you about some of the non-native seaweed species that are around us. Some of them everyone encounters regularly. They've been here for a long, long time. And they've pretty much become naturalized and are just common background seaweed you would see at the beach. Others are a little more rare. And then some of our, with climate change and, more globalization, we have some other non-natives just knocking at our door waiting to come in. So we'll give you an introduction for those of you who don't know anything about seaweeds and invasives, and then those of you who do, maybe I can supply you with some extra info that you weren't aware of. So for this talk, I'm going to talk about the potential impacts of non-native species. These are not necessarily all negative. There are documented positives with non-native species being introduced when they do not conflict with native species and find their own niche. This has been covered where this group especially is very aware of how things get around. This has been going on since humans have been sailing the oceans. We've been moving things around. It's just gotten that we've become more efficient because the travel times are shorter, and these organisms aren't exposed to conditions for very long that are not hospitable to their growth. I will go through what species we actually have documented in New York waters and some potential future introductions to the area. We'll cover how do we go about trying to manage non-native seaweeds, and then I'll give you a summary of where we are. And so getting into the impacts of non-native seaweeds, one of the biggest ones that people get concerned about is what effect did non-natives that come in have on our native species. So displacement is one of the biggest potential threats. And if you have a native species that's of commercial value, things like Chondrus crispus or Irish moss, which is used for carrageenan production, or things like sugar kelp, which are and even Palmaria palmata, which is dulse. Those are all commercially valuable species that are grown in the Northeast. And we've had introductions, we've had at least one introduction that threatens two of those species, and we have another one that potentially could threaten the third. So when we look at Chondrus and Palmaria, the introduction of Guadalupe turatura is Carol Thornburr at URI has been looking into the possibility that this introduced species, which was introduced to Narragansett Bay in around 1994, late 90s, when I was in grad school and I worked on the initial monitoring and mapping of the spread. We started to see back then that we were seeing less Palmaria on the rocky shores of southern Narragansett Bay. Apparently that is intensified and also spread to potentially decrease or loss in biomass on these shorelines of Chondrus in areas where Guadalupe has gotten a foothold. So that's a real big concern. If you wind up displacing these native species, certain non-native seaweed species can create monocultures and completely crowd out your local species, and you would absolutely lose biodiversity, which can then infect all the organisms right up the food chain. You see things like that on the urchin barrens up in Maine, where the urchins killing back the kelp. You're not getting kelp recruiting back to those spots because you have other species like codium and some others are growing in place of that and preventing the kelp from reintroducing that in turn. And those species are not preferred food for the urchins, so you lose urchins. You also lose habitat for a juvenile lobster. So it's just a big snowball effect in certain areas. So that covers also habitat value for native fauna. You get these non-native species in, our local fauna don't recognize them as a food source, or these species have defenses against local grazers that would prevent them from being eaten. So there again, you're losing another check that native species would have. This next one touches on the daisy siphonia and the complaints coming out of Great South Bay, both on the Fire Island side and up on the North Shore, with these nuisance macroalgae blooms. Red species of seaweeds especially are difficult to deal with for waterfront homeowners because they produce not only hydrogen sulfide as they degrade, but they have a lot of bromated or bromulated hydrocarbons that are pretty noxious as well. And this was a problem when I was in school. My professor, Marilyn Harlan at University of Rhode Island, had worked with the city of Newport for years at First Beach and Second Beach, trying to figure out the best way of preventing the red macroalgal drift on the beach. And finally, they gave up trying to prevent it from washing up and just worked with removing it from the beach and composting it. And then in some cases, again, with daisy siphonia, you could get this near shore decomposition would result in changes in DO, and then other noxious metabolites that get produced. So water quality changes could potentially have impacts across the ecosystem. As I mentioned and alluded to, not all introductions are necessarily bad. So for some species, when they are introduced, they find a niche that's open in the local environment. There's a lot of those species across the world. There's examples that can be found locally. We have some. Those are usually the non-native species that you don't hear much about and you don't see them very often. We have a few of those, and I'll point them out when I go through the list of what we have identified locally. They really are innocuous because they don't call attention to themselves. They don't displace anything. They don't impact the food chain. They just kind of slipped in, and they're the house guests that never left, but you don't really mind them. Some of them increase biodiversity, so not all of them. So not only increasing species, but in some cases, these species are edible by our local grazers, or provide habitat in some cases for juvenile fish, or things to that effect. So they actually can increase the local biodiversity and habitat value at the same time. And believe it or not, one of our invasives that was a major nuisance, there were a couple papers that came out by John Carroll, who's down in the Carolinas, or maybe Georgia now, but he was in Brad Peterson's lab at Stony Brook, where they actually found that in areas that had formerly been eelgrass meadows, and the eelgrass had gone extinct in these areas, codium had come in and replaced the eelgrass. The codium was not the reason that the eelgrass died off, but it was able to colonize these formerly eelgrass meadow areas, and bay scallops were using those areas as habitat. So in this case, you have what was a nuisance invasion, from the 1950s, for one type of shellfish became a boon for another type by creating new habitat and protecting bug scallops. And then there's also the potential for some species to come in. They become established, these non-natives, and in their home range, they're exploitable economically, and they're able to be exploited in their introduced range as well. So it's there's always there seems to be some positives, but for most non-native introductions, we usually see an impact before there's kind of a leveling off, and that goes for most of the species we'll encounter today. So basic vectors, not going to spend a lot of time on this. Shipping, as I said, since humans have been plying the oceans with ships, we've been moving species around. Our efficiency at moving these species has gotten better because our travel times over the oceans, which used to form barriers, now do not. Also the fact that we went from using things like ballast stones for ballast to ballast water, where we're taking these organisms or their spores in the case of most macroalgae and holding them inside where they're not getting exposed to the different ocean environments that might kill them off before they reach their new introduced home. it's just made it a lot easier. And many of the more recent introductions to North America by macroalgae have been through ballast and spores or macroalgae fragments. Another one as well is fisheries. It used to be that most countries, their fishermen stayed close to home. Fishermen are traveling further and then coming back to home port. There's really not a lot of ways to kind of sanitize or clean up your gear. So most cases, marine organisms dry out and they don't do well in gear stored on the deck. But in some cases, some species are a little hardier, and you drop those nets that are contaminated in your home port, and you potentially just introduced a new species. Aquaculture has been pretty much the biggest culprit for marine introductions, especially with seaweeds. The problem is if you're moving things like oysters, and a lot of that was done early in the century, there was a lot of interest in trying to get Pacific oysters growing in the Atlantic. They were benefits for them marketability wise. The problem was certain species hitched along, one being codium, known as oyster thief, and then potentially some of the porphyras as well. And now a new potential issue comes with seaweed aquaculture. Now, the current seaweed aquaculture being conducted in the Northeast is using all native species from native sources. However, that doesn't mean that someone down the road, one of these, a seaweed farmer that's a little less scrupulous than others, decides instead of growing sugar kelp, he wants to grow wakimi, which is Undaria. And he writes to somebody in Japan, China, or Korea, and they send him a seed spool. And he decides to grow it, and there we go. There's an introduction. So these are things that need to be considered in the newly growing seaweed aquaculture industry. Most of the time, as I said, you have the introductions based or accounted for by aquaculture. Basically, you're bringing shellfish in, and the shells were not cleaned thoroughly, so you're leaving fragments of the seaweed thallus on there, or in the case of porphyra, it has an actual shell boring filamentous stage. So it's almost impossible to get that off in many cases unless you were to actually be able to dip and decontaminate. And then there are shellfish research and aquaculture research facilities throughout the world. Accidents happen. Someone accidentally opens the wrong, valve and drains a tank into local waters with larvae from some other place. That's not uncommon. And then your aquarium trade is another one, some of the most famous. There's our lionfish. That was, I believe, Hurricane Andrew in Florida. They believe lionfish that were in aquariums broke, got washed into the local waters. Callirpa is another story that was released. One of the major releases was by an actual professional aquaria and into the Mediterranean, and has caused the extensive economic impact in the Mediterranean from Callirpa being introduced. So just a quick overview on the non-native species that we have on Long Island. We're home to at least 12 non-native species. Majority, 11 of the species are red macroalgae. There's one green macroalga, which is codium. And in addition to those 12 confirmed species, we have a few that represent either a near future threat, one pretty imminent, and then one that I get asked a lot of questions about because which is Callirpa, because it's always in the news and it has an ominous common name of killer algae. And with climate change, I would say earliest would be 30 plus years down the road for the cold tolerant strain to be able to survive even for part of the year in New York. But typically we're too cold for most of the year. Clerpa doesn't do well under 50 degrees. The cold tolerant gets down into the upper 40s, so it gives it a bit of a window. But we could wind up seeing incidentals, seasonal incidentals, sort of like lionfish. You know, they're here for the summer, but they don't make it through the winter. All right, let's get to our rogues gallery. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. There is a lot of information on these, but I can, you know, break these down. But I wanted to give you pictures so you can kind of put a face to the name. Almost everybody should be familiar in our region with codium. Codium was introduced in Orient Harbor. It was believed to be on oysters, which most likely was the case. There was a lot of oyster aquaculture that was done since, you know, the early part of the 1900s in that area. It was introduced from Asia. This is so one of the common names, Sputnik weed. I don't know if some people may have never heard of that. It has a few others. So oyster thief. Codium is very buoyant. And if you get a big clump of codium growing on an oyster shell during a storm, it'll actually walk that oyster with the waves up onto the beach. So after nor'easters and such on eastern Long Island, you'd see just windrows loaded with codium that were attached to oysters. And the locals would have a gala and go out there and collect buckets of oysters off the beach. The other name, Sputnik weed, there was some conspiracy theories thinking that when Sputnik was launched, this showed up around the same time, that the Russians somehow seeded this into our waters from the Sputnik satellite. There's a couple other cool names, Dead Man's Fingers, and one of my favorite is Bob Marley's hair because it looks like dreadlocks. This species is pretty much naturalized here. It's ubiquitous. It's found in every single estuary we have, and it goes right up, you know, into the Canadian Maritimes. Very, very common, and it's had mixed impacts on the region, and now pretty much all seaweed biologists kind of consider it just part of the ecosystem. The rest of these are going to be red seaweeds. A lot of them are filamentous. They're gorgeous. They look great when you press them, but some of them are a little bit more nuisance than others. Antithamnium is absolutely gorgeous species viewed under the microscope. This one was first reported in Connecticut, Long Island Sound in 1986, probably came by ship ballast. It was introduced to Europe from Asia prior to being reported in North America, so it could have come from either location. Really very little impact to our area, and not commonly encountered. So whenever I do see it underwater, I always take a sample back to press it because it does make absolutely gorgeous presses. And I use those for gifts quite often. Another one that's rare, but one of my favorites to find is Bommasonium. It's called hookweed, and you can actually see these little tendrils or hook-shaped tendrils on the top. Definitely cooler water. I used to find this more frequently when I was in Rhode Island. Typically now we really only see them in eastern Long Island Sound. I can generally count on finding it along the south shore of Fisher's Island. Again, this showed up in the early 1900s at Woods Hole, probably a ship introduction. And again, this is a cool water species. So with climate change, right now, eastern Long Island Sound is the only place that I've seen it reported or seen it myself. With water temperatures increasing, we may see this species lost to this area, and its range probably would move up around the Cape. The infamous daisy, Daisy siphonia japonica. So this species is more widely found in our area than you'd think, but because it's related to Polysiphonia species, which we have a lot of, and they're very, very common, if you're not looking for it, it's very easy not to notice it. And I probably for a few years now, at least 5 or 6 before I really started looking for it, saw it regularly in areas, especially in Eastern Long Island Sound, and just thought it was a Polyphonia and never took note. This species, however, can become a problem, and it seems to be more problematic in estuarine areas like Great South Bay, where you get these blooms of macroalgae. So it'll attach to even the smallest hard substrate, little pebbles, fragments of shell. And as Meg mentioned, it's not super heat tolerant. I get more reports and complaints, especially at Heckscher State Park. Seems to be late winter, early spring, they get a lot of this washing up. A couple of years ago, we had some ice in Great South Bay, and people were reporting the blood red ice. Daisy was getting frozen in the ice, and the cells were rupturing, and it was bleeding out the red pigment and turning the ice this blood dark red, and people were really freaking out about it. It's one of those things that it's growing, and in the case of like a warm season release, the water temperature spikes and probably causes a lot of this to just release from their holdfasts and float up on the shore, where it decomposes, produces a lot of hydrogen sulfide and some other noxious gases. And this seems to be becoming more and more of a problem in Great South Bay. So for at least the last 3 winters, there have been reports of it becoming an issue, especially around the Heckscher State Park area. We have Demantia contorta. This is Dumont's redweed. Another one that's not super common. It kind of looks like our Gracilaria and Agardiellas, except that it's hollow. We get the little bit of the twisting to the blades, which kind of is a clue for people that know what to look for. More estuarine. Again, introduced, 100 years ago, and really hasn't made much of an impact in the area. And again, I don't see it very often, but I have seen it in a couple spots and regularly in Great South Bay and Fire Island Inlet, and then 2 spots we encounter it pretty regularly in the Peconics. But other than that, pretty rare, and again, no impact. Gracilaria vermiculophylla. So we have a native species of Gracilaria, tickvehii, which is a commercially exploitable native species. And then we have the introduction of Gracilaria vermiculophylla. This was first reported, I believe, by Charlie Arish, his crew at UConn. I may be wrong on that, in 2010 in Long Island Sound. And then since then, Charlie Arish's lab has identified it in a couple of the harbors on the North Shore of Long Island, and also in a couple spots in Eastern Peconic Estuary. Down south, where it was first introduced in Virginia, this species will grow in soft bottom. It doesn't need hard substrate. And it actually caused competition issues with seagrasses. We haven't seen that as an issue in the New York region yet, and we may never at this point. The main issue we're going to have with seaweed aquaculture becoming popular, and eventually seaweed growers are going to look for summer species. So sugar kelp is a winter species, and most of them would probably turn to Gracilaria, which we would want that to be our local native species, tickvehii. Vermiculophylla has been found to actually produce a toxin which can cause kidney damage and death. It's not very common in its native range, but apparently I've read a couple papers that the alga is more likely to produce the toxin in its introduced range. So for aquaculture purposes, there's really, Charlie Arish supposedly can tell it the difference between the species just looking at them at a sample. For the rest of us, you need a biomolecular test to tell the difference between the species. So for aquaculture, that would be something that would could be a real problem if you're growing the wrong species and then causing people to be poisoned. So this is one that will definitely be of more concern as the years go on and seaweed aquaculture picks up in the region. Guadalupe turatura. This I have a lot of experience with this species. It was pretty fortunate that Meg picked the cards that she did to show, and it was Guadalupe and then the locals that looked like it. So when it first showed up in Narragansett Bay, as I said, I was in grad school and was part of the projects to map it. And one of the things that they were telling our citizen science volunteers was, yes, it looks a lot like Dulce, Palmaria palmata. It kind of does, but once you get used to it, the biggest thing with this species, to tell the difference for those of you who've never encountered it before, and if you want that experience, I can give you all sorts of locations all over Long Island that you could probably find it. If you take it out of the water and rub it between your hands, it feels like it's slick. But if you take your fingers off of it and rub your fingers together, there's not like a mucus or a slime associated with that. The surface of the alga is actually is slick, but it's not due to a mucus production, which other species have. And it's, this flat red, almost looks like a burgundy red version of sea lettuce, of ulva. And that's usually your cues on those. Larry Little from Southampton College, Dr. Larry Little, first identified Guadalupe at Montauk Point in 2001. And I actually have a herbarium specimen here in my office from one of his students that had come to work for Cornell shortly after that, that she had pressed from that same trip that they had identified it. Guadalupe does have potential for commercial exploitation. However, most experts in the fields shy away from doing any kind of commercial work with non-native species, even once they become established in an area, which that may be something we have to reconsider in the future. The next two are pretty rare. These are examples of non-natives that kind of found a niche, fit in, and basically they don't stir the pot and no one really notices them, partly because they're not super large, showy seaweeds. But especially the orchidensis is really cool if you can find it. Really gorgeous seaweed. So Lomenteria clavellosa is more of a more recent introduction, apparently first identified in 1963. One of the other reasons that most people wouldn't notice this is because it commingles with a native Lomenteria species, Baileyana, that is pretty common. So, and that's where I've found samples of this mixed in with the native species. It was only pulling them through and doing some keying that I realized that I didn't have Baileyana, I had the Clellosa. The Lomenteria orchidensis is an old introduction, and this one, we have nothing else really locally that would be confused with this. This is very small. The specimens I've found are usually less than an inch tall. And I've only found it in one spot, and that was in the Baconics. And I haven't seen it since. So pretty rare. Neosiphonia is used to be a Polysiphonia harvey. So it's in the same group that the Daisia Siphonia is in, or very appears similar. It makes it difficult for most people to tell the difference between native Polysiphonias and the Neosiphonia unless you're kind of know what to look for. Very common. This is an old introduction, and pretty much I see it everywhere we go around Long Island, in every estuary. It's pretty adaptable and can be found pretty much year round. The last ones I'm going to get into of the confirmed species, we have the porphyras. We have two species that are non-native, but you can find them pretty much everywhere. And usually they're found in the presence of our native species of porphyra as well. You have suborbiculata and yezoensis. I always have a problem with that one. Your porphyras are your nori, or if you're in Europe, laver. So this is what you wrap, nori is what sushi's wrapped in. These were both, these species were both reported in Long Island Sound in the 1960s. And it's believed it was introduced through shellfish aquaculture. There were some people that suggested it might have been Milford. I'm not pointing any fingers, but as I mentioned earlier, this species has a conchocoelous stage, which is a shell boring filamentous stage. So oysters that are brought from the Pacific, even if they're scrubbed clean and look white, it is quite possible that they're harboring this filamentous stage inside the shell itself, which will produce spores and could cause the release. And that's likely what happened. I can't say that these have become more common or displaced the local species. Honestly, they seem to be found in the same quantities. And at this point, being that they are a commercially exploitable species, and we don't see enough of it for anybody to have taken advantage of it at this point, I would assume that their impact has been minimal and in the ecology of Long Island Sound. I've not been able to identify these in the Peconics or the South Shore yet. That also could just be a lack of sampling intensity. And that's something I'll address later. So the next 4 species now we're getting into, these are our potential introductions, either imminent, near future, or a little more distant future. Meg had sent me an email, I want to say the beginning of the summer, about Colpomenia. This is called sea potato. We actually have a local species, native species of sea potato, Leithisia deformis, which typically see in Long Island Sound and Eastern Peconics. I do a lot of work in Fisher's Island, especially the last few years, working with kelp. I have not seen this in the Eastern Long Island Sound and around Fisher's yet, but it has been identified in Eastern Rhode Island. And I believe that Jim Carlton has basically said that it's just a matter of time before we see it in Long Island Sound and potentially spreading into the Peconics and other water bodies further south. This species also can be a problem with shellfish, with attaching to them and floating them up on the beaches during storms. And another interesting fact about this is, so these are hollow gas-filled sacs, and this is the gametophyte stage. If they break loose from whatever they're attached to, either as an epiphyte on seaweed or attached to shellfish, they float, and they can be carried by currents pretty good distances where they can release spores. So it's not surprising that this species, which started north of the Cape, has found its way all the way to our area pretty quickly. So this is pretty much imminent species. I expect to see this. Most cases, it's going to be difficult for lay people to tell the difference between this and Leithisia, but there are some keys up with points to look for telling the difference. Sargassum muticum, this is a species that many of you have probably heard about. Next to Caulerpa, this is probably one of the worst seaweed invaders. This is native to it. We do have a local species of Sargassum, Philippindula, which forms pretty extensive beds along within the Peconics. I also see it quite frequently in shallow or coastal waters in Long Island Sound that are a little more sheltered, not super open coast. And we encounter it a lot intermingled, the local species, with eelgrass meadows. So Sargassum unicum is not here yet, but it did become established in Europe in 1973, and it's widespread there now. It's pretty hardy, so it definitely could make the trip from Europe to the United States. So it could be a near future introduction to the area. And being that it's a sargassum and we already have a local species, there for the initiated, it's pretty easy to tell this difference, but it could be overlooked by other people that don't have the background. So, and our water temperatures, I have here maybe too cold. However, they do have records of it growing up into Ireland. So it gets pretty cold in those areas and should at least be comparable to what it would experience on Long Island. And our main concern is displacing our local species and potentially even displacing seagrass meadows if it gets established, because it's more aggressive than our local sargassum species. The next species is another one that it's been spread around the world to other temperate regions. It hasn't found its way that we know of yet to the Northwest Atlantic, but all conditions here are pretty much within its optimal range for growth to survive. And again, with it having a value as an aquaculture product, once if seaweed aquaculture really increases in popularity and economic viability in the Northeast, you could see unscrupulous people trying to take advantage and moving from our local kelps to something that they consider to be more economically viable and bringing something like this in. I don't know how high the risk is for this at this point. I haven't come across too many unscrupulous aquaculture people in my work over the last few years, but I'm sure they're out there. But the main danger we have here is that the Wakemi is more heat tolerant or higher water temperature tolerant, and what we're seeing, especially on Long Island, we're at our southern limit for our kelps geographical range, and with climate change, they're getting pressured more and more that we may soon lose them within the next 10-20 years. There may be no more kelps within the New York waters. All the kelps would migrate north into the cooler waters that they're tolerant to, but the Undaria would be left behind, and we're not sure how that would affect the local ecology, because our native kelp support pretty complex food webs. And then again, I mentioned Caulerpa earlier, and the only reason I include this in all of my non-native seaweed talks is that it's one of those that everyone gets afraid of because it's called killer algae and it's caused such problems in other areas. For now, I don't see this being an imminent threat for Long Island, and I'm not going to even spend any more time there. So getting into management. So really the best way of managing non-native seaweeds is to keep them out of your area or identify them quickly. Once they get established, it's nearly impossible to get rid of them. There have been a few success stories. California was able to get rid of Caulerpa introduction in Southern California about 10 years ago. That was 30 square meters of Caulerpa that started to grow in coastal waters. They were able, that's containable and manageable. Once it gets past that, it becomes less cost effective. So we need to identify threats to the area early and track their progression. Are we finding them showing up in Canada or north of the Cape or south of us, and understand how they're moving around and try to either manage those vectors and pathways or block them if possible. And then education for local people. You have all sorts of boater education on lakes for things like rib mussels. People clean their boats after you've been in different lakes before you go into another one. You know, those types of things could be instituted for the marine districts in New York as well. Monitoring, which is where we're really lacking, just because the scope of it in marine waters is just monstrous. It's an environment that we are not native to. We have to carry our environment with us in scuba to really get in there and do the work. It's vast and things move around pretty easily in the water via currents and you know, other vectors. So things like eDNA, which is relatively new, would be great for getting a general idea of what may actually be out there that we're missing. In most cases for seaweeds, eDNA sampling, even though it's really covers broad areas potentially, if you know that something that is a non-native seaweed species in your waters, it's a really narrow range that those species and habitats that those species can grow. Most of them need hard substrate and need light. So you're talking, in most cases, you're talking shorelines that have some kind of hard substrates and are no deeper than probably 25 or 30 feet, and most cases on Long Island even less than that, to receive ample light for growth. You know, with the e-sampling could lead to some, once something's identified, less frequent, more comprehensive surveys. And then Meg talked about the rapid assessment surveys, which there have been a few done on Long Island in recent years. The 2003 survey and the Peconics found 2 indigenous, non-indigenous or non-native species. And then for monitoring, public outreach is always important. You know, I've got a lot of, from different groups, everybody's really keyed in on the mitten crabs. So, you know, these wanted posters are not a bad thing. People pay attention to this stuff. And then another thing we were talking about, you know, a day of the life. Basically the day of life or bioblitzes. These are very effective, and you can actually, there's multiple, you have IMAP could potentially sponsor these. And then you also have eNaturalist. I've been on a few of those for the Peconics, and some, I've been on one up in Rhode Island with a group. So, you know, to get the public involved is very easy in this case. And then finally, if you have to get to the management and control, we're probably already lost the battle. I hate to sound defeatist, but it's very difficult to control these non-native seaweed introductions once they've become established, and extremely expensive. I believe it was somewhere around almost $10 million for California to eradicate 30 square meters of Caulerpa. So, you know, really, if we can keep them out, that would be the best management practice. Once they become established, you know, we'll be looking at them for probably as permanent members of the local environment. So real quick, we have 12 species that have been identified as non-native. Probably, I wouldn't be surprised if there are others. Colpomenia may already be here. There's a lack of comprehensive surveys in the region, so, you know, there may be more here. You know, again, Colpomenia is right on the doorstep, Eastern Connecticut, Western Rhode Island. It's probably on Fisher's Island by now. And then the problem with climate change and warming waters, we're opening the doors for other non-native species, you know, in the not too distant future. I would say probably 30 to 50 years for Caulerpa, but we don't know if that species morphs, mutates, and you wind up with a even more cooler tolerant down to 45 degrees. So these are things to consider down the road for management. And then managing introductions, prevention is really the best way. And the only way to do that is to educate the people managing our water bodies, have them be aware of the situations, and also formulating management plans to reduce the risks of introductions, which this group and the others in the state have been doing for years with terrestrial introductions. It'd be nice to see more monitoring. We don't even really know definitively what's already been introduced to our waters. So if we can get some more monitoring up, and even if we don't find those, the baseline data of, okay, we know at this time there were none of these species here. 10 years later, we're starting to see these. So it gives you an idea of time frame, which helps determine what your management is going to be for the third step of control or eradication. And I think that's it for me. Yep. So I'll stop sharing. I'm sorry I went over.
Thank you, Steve. Does anyone have any questions for Steve? You can put them in the chat. You probably unmute. Trying to ask that way. I think it's interesting that at least one species, the scallops, has benefited. What are those Peconic Bay scallops?
Yeah. So this was that study was done in Halleck's Bay in Orient, and that used to support a 40-acre eelgrass meadow. And that meadow with brown tide and other factors died off. And so eelgrass is an ecosystem engineer. So basically the bottoms get softer once eelgrass gets established, because it's causing accretion of the finer sediments. So most seaweeds need hard substrate. They won't be able to settle. Once the eelgrass died off, we started seeing those fine sediments scouring, and now you're getting shell hash and the cobble that was underneath exposed, and the codium came in. So these were researchers working with Dr. Steve Tuttleback and Brad Peterson, and his grad student, John, and they were seeing scallops in the codium. And when they were doing their normal surveys for scallops, so they were intrigued to see, well, now are the scallops using this as a preferential habitat? And John published not only his thesis, but they also have a publication. I want to say it's Carroll et al. Either 2012 or 2013. His thesis was 2009. But yeah, he used to kid me about, oh, see, eelgrass isn't that important anyway. So I could stop trying to restore it. Maureen's got a question.
I see that. Yeah, Maureen, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Steve.
Hi,
This is
Maureen.
Maureen. That was just fantastic. I love seaweed myself as well. So seaweed nerds. But I've been thinking, about the increase in aquaculture, particularly in like Great South Bay, and it just dramatically increases available substrate, both for all biofouling, tunicates as well, which concern me, but and the seaweeds. Is there any education type material going out to like shellfish growers and all aquaculture coming in? Is there any plan for education that?
So yeah, no. That's the simple question, or a simple answer. The issue is that for New York, it's so new. So right now, Maureen, as of this season, New York State has required that anyone trying to grow seaweed, and sugar kelp is grown during the winter months, so fouling is pretty much held at a minimum. The lines are taken out by usually the end of May latest. For the South Shore, it's usually mid-May. You don't want fouling on your product because it reduces the quality. So once growers see fouling, they're harvesting and they're removing their stuff. I would think aquaculture cages provide more substrate than seaweed lines right now. So, and then with the requirement for full aquaculture permits, which I only know of one person that's filled that out in Great South Bay, for commercial seaweed aquaculture for this year, it's been slow to pick up. So that's something we still have some time to evaluate and try to get those materials out, and maybe some kind of educational information could be part of their permit package. That's something we'd have to work out with DEC, and that might be something that Cornell could develop, or other groups. We're trying to involve the state DOS and other state organizations, because this is an industry that's has potential to become valuable to the state as an income source. So
Yeah.
but yeah, we're so early right now that this is not, it hadn't been a priority. It was get the permitting and regulatory in place so that it didn't become a Wild West. And now we need to refine that so that it still doesn't become a Wild West, with introductions or other, bad habits that
Right.
try to avert the bad habits now.
And that, yeah, that would be good to see. Can I just ask a second part really quick? How can someone like myself help to increase the rapid assessment surveys? Or to push for rapid assessment surveys, because it seems like that's really key to a lot of these aquatic invasives.
Anyone else can feel free to chime in too, but for seaweeds, it becomes difficult because you're going to still need someone with background to be able to run through the taxonomic keys and identify some of these species, because there is microscopic traits that need to be evaluated. And then something like Rossularia vermiculophylla, you're going to confirm definitively, you need to run biomolecular, unless you can have Charlie Arish at every single one of your assessments. The nice thing with seaweeds, however, is that you can preserve them indefinitely by pressing them and drying them. So you don't necessarily have to worry about preserving the specimens in formaldehyde and such. But so even taking samples and being taught how to properly preserve them, we could get citizen science involved in these things, and it could be something that I could work with my team, who are all proficient seaweed taxonomy, could work on in our slow time over the winter, going through samples.
That's great. Thank you. That's great. Yeah.
There was a question in chat about where people can learn to press seed. Do you have any resources to share from
I don't have an ID for them. There are IDs that are scattered all over the place. UMass has one out. Rhode Island had one out. That's something I can put together and make available. Basically, the species I have on my list in this presentation, that's something I can put together in a PDF and have one of my coworkers pretty it up a little bit with some of those images that everyone seems to like, and I can make that available on our website if people are interested.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, we have a question from the room.
Hi, this is probably a stupid question, but what are the seaweeds that's grown in aquaculture used for? What are the various uses?
Sugar kelp is used for directly as food. It's prepared multiple different ways. It also is harvested for alginate, which is an emulsifier. So you'll find sodium alginate in applications like oil, any kind of oil-based salad dressing. It helps when you shake it up. It keeps the water and oil from separating. It's used in cosmetics. It's used in pharmaceuticals. Sargassum is also an alginate producer. In Europe, they harvest sargassum, and which is another brown seaweed. And then you get into the red seaweeds. That's your carrageenans and your agars, which carrageenan is in things like ice cream and chocolate milk. It keeps things smooth, keeps the ice crystals from forming. And agar is used, of course, in biological testing, microbiological agar plates you hear about, but it's also a thickener for cosmetics and things. So growers are looking to maximize their their profit margin over however many groups are willing to buy their product. But primarily in New York, it's going to be food for the beginning of the industry's growth.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve.
Yep, appreciate it.
Thank you. Naya is here. Naya made it. Our window, it's exactly here. Let's come back in 10 minutes. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Great question. With us is Naja Kraus. Naja is a forest health scientist in DEC's Bureau of Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health. Naja holds a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from SUNY Binghamton and a master's degree in plant science and environmental forest biology from SUNY ESF. Naja has been with DEC's forest health program since 2005, starting with a focus on forest defoliators, and moving to work on terrestrial invasive plants. Currently, Naja coordinates the DEC's statewide response to giant hogweed invasive. So welcome. Glad you made it. I know it was a difficult journey, but you're here now.
Yes,
All right.
I will be where I park my car. That's not. Great. Oh, how do I, is this my dancer? I can even.
That's your microphone.
That's my mic. Yeah. Can everybody see the slides? If somebody can confirm that. Okay, well, now that I'm here, but no longer waiting for the police or in the auto repair shop, I'm going to talk to you guys about giant hogweed. So I'm just going to sort of cover general information about giant hogweed, how to work safely around it, should you ever encounter giant hogweed, talk about a lot about our program, the control methods we use, how to identify giant hogweed, which you'd obviously need to do in order to report new sites. I'm really thrilled to see one of our old hogweed technicians, not that you're old, but former hogweed technicians here, Yuri, so that's really fun. One of the really neat things about this program is that we've been doing it now since 2008. And when I started, my main focus really was about the plant, you know, and the work that we're doing, which is still there, but over time, it's really grown into realizing that one of the other main parts of our program is that we're creating, you know, invasive species scientists and people, giving people experience with field work. You know, there's over, I think, 120 or 130 people that have worked on our program over these years. And so you'll start seeing, you know, hogweeders, intrepid staff all around the state, which I love. So moving on. So just so you know what we're talking about, and I'll talk more about ID a little bit later, it's a very large, invasive, non-native plant. It can grow what the adult plant can grow, you know, 8 to 14 feet tall, well, double, you know, someone's height. The umbels are really large. It has these purple blotches on the stem and really huge leaves. That's the adult. The smaller plant, the younger plant, you know, people won't necessarily notice, but the adults, they do. It's native to the Caucasus mountain regions. It grows up in the top of the mountains. Even there, when it comes lower down in elevation, it becomes invasive. So it's not like a plant that you can use biological control so well, because even in its own area, there aren't really things that keep it in check other than its sort of local habitat. So this is an article that a reporter gave me many years ago, which I absolutely love. It's from 1901, and it really shows like sort of the beginning of how this plant came here and all the other invasive plants. You know, if we can only go back in time and tell these people, no, please leave things where they belong, that would be great. But you can see, so it says in the year, with my reading glasses, in the year 1892, 2 botanists living in Florence explored the Central Caucasus. They, you know, traversed in the mountains. The aim of their travels was a botanical exploration and resulted in the discovery of a good number of species new to science. You know, this was like, you know, they were in the hearts of really learning new things. So there we go, giant hogweed. They then explored up there. It says many of them have done very well, but none has produced such an effect as the soon to be renowned Kathleen mantegiziana.
on account of its gigantic proportion and its monumental aspect. According to Dr. Levier, whom we sent a portion of the umbel, which is the flower head, the plant must have borne something like 10,000 flowers. It supplied us with the seed, which we were able to distribute to the trade and to amateurs and also to its discoverers. Ding! Right? That's the start. That's where it started its journey. And then they said its cultivation is an easy matter. You know, it's like steep rich soil that's cool and damp. It's only in these conditions that it will attain the greatest size, but even in those that are less favorable, it will do fairly well. So there's how giant hogweed started its adventures around the world. So when we started our program, and so right in 1905, I think they have botanical samples from, goodness, my brain is fried, but showing that it was in the Rochester area in that time. So right there, you know, those seeds came to Rochester. It's like the epicenter of where giant hogweed is statewide. So when we started our program in 2007, it had already been here, right, for 100 years or so. And we knew of around 378 known sites in 27 counties. Well, it's a lot, but we can manage that. That's something we can do about. It's important enough that we can make a difference. So, you know, now in 2022, we know of 2,726 known sites in 52 counties. So it's not that the plant itself has dramatically increased its range. It's that as you look for something, you find it, right? So with outreach, in the beginning, nobody knew what we were talking about. Now a lot of people hopefully do know what giant hogweed is. And so we get a lot more reports, and so we know a lot more locations. However, by now, 87% of our sites have less than 100 plants. So we're making, you know, a pretty big difference. So this is just a quick and dirty map of where the sites are in Long Island. I figured you guys would be interested in that. There are only 18 known sites currently in Long Island, and only 4 of those sites had plants this year. And of those 4 sites, there was only 9 juveniles found and controlled. So we've really made a huge difference in the sites in Long Island. And just to give you a big picture, like Long Island has 18 sites. Finger Lakes Prism has, you know, 1,500 sites or something like that. So we're on the outskirts. But these are really important to us. Like the areas that we care a lot about are, of course, our outskirts sites, because we don't want you to ever look like Western New York, right? We don't want them to get out of control. We want to keep the site small. One thing I want to say, just as a caveat, is there known sites are ones that we know about that are reported to us. I suspect that Long Island has more unknown sites to us on old, you know, estates, big houses. If people don't report them to us, if they're not visible from the road, we won't know about it. So I would love an outreach push in this area, because as people learn about it, then maybe they would report it, and it can be controlled quickly. So the habitat that it likes, as it did same as in 1901, right? It likes moist soils. We have a lot along streams. That's our biggest issues out in Central and Western New York, because that's where it can just spread, right? If it doesn't spread, it just goes from like me to Uri from one year to the next. But if it's along a stream, you know, it can go really, really far. Roadsides is another source where we have a lot of giant hogweed plants. It also spreads by mowers, old abandoned farm fields, and forests. A lot of people think, oh, giant hogweed doesn't do that well in forests, but it actually can do quite fine. It just will take longer to achieve enough energy in its root to flower and set seed. And then, of course, there's backyards and, you know, fancy houses that we don't know about. So just to explain how giant hogweed works, it starts as a seedling, it germinates in the spring, and then, you know, throughout the year, as if it gets a little opening above it, it'll germinate later in the growing season, and it becomes sort of a rosette of leaves. The first year is just a little leaf, and then it dies back. The next year it's a bigger leaf, dies back. Depending on the richness of the soil and the amount of sun it gets, sort of sets the stage for how long it takes before it becomes an adult. typically like 3 to 5 years, but it can take 7 to 10 for maybe a forested site. So eventually it gets enough energy in its root that it bolts, becomes an adult and sets seed. And then that individual plant dies. That's the end of that plant. So that's to some degree the reason that we can have a control program, because of the delayed flowering. It gives us, if it flowered every year, we wouldn't have a program because we couldn't manage it. So, again, as I mentioned, it spreads through seed. The average plant produces 20,000 seeds. Some of the really robust ones can do 100,000 seeds. So you can imagine if it's along a stream, how it can really spread. Most of them without that water source or wind will, just fall within 10 meters. And most of them are within the top 5 centimeters of the soil. And they can be viable for more than 5 years, up to 12, I think even maybe in a lab. So the spread mechanisms, most of them, or a lot of them were planted, right? A lot of the Long Island ones were like different. When you look at populations that are sort of random, they were all pretty much just brought there by people. After that, they're spread by water, mowing, soil, and wind. And by wind, I don't mean like a milkweed seed wind. I mean, like it's winter and there's just snow on the ground and the wind comes and sort of blows them across the top of the snow, like a big wind. And the seeds are kind of like little flat sunflower seed size, and a little bit light, but not flying in the air wind. So one of the things people always wonder is, how does giant hogweed cause a burn? It causes a burn because all parts of the plant, they contain photosensitizing uranocoumarin. So it's a compound in the sap that basically, if it gets on your skin and it's exposed to sun and UV light, it makes your skin unable to protect itself from the sun. It actually like changes something in the cell DNA or something like that. But basically it's like an anti-sunblock. So if you got it on you and then hung out in your closet for a day or two and didn't get any UV light, nothing would happen to you. It's not like poison ivy, where it's the combination of the sun and the moisture. And pretty much its window is between like 15 minutes to 30 minutes is its peak time, or 30 minutes to 2 hours. And then the burns come within the next day or two. So what would you do if you came in contact with a sap? You want to handle this slide? You're gonna wash up immediately. So our crews, they do obviously encounter the plant sap when they're out in the field, and they go and wash with soap and water immediately, and they don't get burned for the most part. Again, out of those 130 staff, we've had, I think, two burns, and one was before we really had a good protocol. And then you're going to protect that from sunlight for 48 hours. You get it on your arm, you wash it up, you're still going to stick like a Band-Aid or something over top of it just to make sure it's really safe. And the same goes for wild parsnip. That's something people will probably encounter more maybe than giant hogweed. If you do get a reaction, a lot of things that people don't know is that you still need to keep that skin protected from the sun. So even after it's washed up and cleaned, the skin is still sort of changed and it needs to be protected. And it could be for years. Like the people who had that really bad burn, she had to wear special pants, like sun protective pants, for a couple of years. And now she's fine years later. Obviously call a doctor. So what can you do to prevent that? You want to learn to recognize giant hogweed and wild parsnip and other ones in the family. Don't touch it with bare skin. Wear waterproof gear when you're working around the plant, including covering your eyes. Wash up afterwards, shower when you get home. So why do we care about giant hogweed? Why do we have a control program? As you can see, not much can grow underneath a mat of giant hogweed, right? And this is just them when they're growing. When they're full grown and 5 feet across leaves, they really shade out everything underneath. This is a picture of, the soil under giant hogweed. So it replaces native plants. When those plants die back at the end of the year, at the end of the summer, if it's on a slope near a stream, it can cause soil erosion. It can affect fisheries. It's a human health hazard, which is one of the reasons that people care, which is great because it gives us a little bit more of an in to get into somebody's property and control the plants. If you show them that, they care more than if it was like mile a minute or whatever. X, any invasive plant you care about, this one affects them. It obviously limits access to recreation areas. We have all sorts of pictures of like playgrounds with giant hogweed and fishing access sites. Nobody wants to go fishing in a giant hogweed patch, or they shouldn't anyhow. And it's against the law. So our giant hogweed program has sort of like three main branches. One is just sort of generic outreach. So if you want any brochures, posters, we have those that we can provide to you. We have a website, we have DEC staff that tweet and Twitter and whatever Facebook and all sorts of different things. We do presentations, trainings, just try to get the word out. We have an information line, which is managed out of the Newport's office, one staff person and an intern or two. And that's a spot where people can report new sites. They can get help identifying all the plants they think is giant hogweed. They can ask questions about the plant, and it's sort of like a connection between the public and the actual crews and landowners. And then we have our control crews and partner agencies. So the people that go out and actually do the monitoring, survey, and control. And then there's some sort of local agencies, like we have one soil and water conservation department that does work on hogweed too. So yeah, these are all our different outreach materials. And then this is our information line. Dan's been with us a number of years. I'm not sure if he was there when you were there, but maybe not. But again, they get like 1,000 to 2,500 calls or emails a year. Most of them are in like a 3-week period when the plant is flowering. So it's a pretty intense position. Of all the calls we get, 1/3 of them are usually giant hogweed, and 1/3 of those are typically new giant hogweed sites. So it's well worth the effort. Again, like I mentioned, field staff are the heart of our program. They work across the state. We have crews in Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo. And then the Long Island sites are handled by myself and whoever is working at the information line. We like it. We call it hogweed vacation because it's in the Hamptons. This is again just all the prisms that work with us. So next year when I do this slide, it'll be the Long Island prism is added in there. Oh, right down here. Long Island prism started this year, so that's very exciting. We met staff out to survey a couple of the sites, and they might take over. I don't know, Dan and I are like, I don't know if we want to let them go. We don't get to go to the beach once a year, but we can collaborate. So that's pretty much just that. We have lots of prisms. They do the work within their counties. Pretty much all the prisms except for Western New York and the Finger Lakes have their own staff. And the Finger Lakes prism actually hires 2 or 3 people that just come into our program and work with us. As part of our program to help control all our sites. So we use 3 main control methods. We use root cutting control, which is, we don't dig it out, but this is just to show you what it looks like. Basically, there's like leaf scars on the root stem, and you want to cut just below that. If you sever the top part of the plant from the root below, then that plant is 100% dead. And so we use that at our small sites, which are like less than 400 plants, and we also use it at sites where landowners don't allow herbicide. And then we use herbicide control at about 40% of our sites, and those are ones that are, more than 400 plants. Some of our Western New York sites are really large, like acres of hogweed. So we're definitely not root cutting those areas. And we also use them in smaller sites where like it's too rocky for digging. And then we use umbel removal at any of the sites that we don't get to before flowering time. Because there's so many sites and we have a lot of people, but no one ever has enough people. So we don't get there before, we don't get to all the sites. And then we just bag those up and leave them in the sun for a week and get rid of them. So these are just some photos showing you before and after. For root cutting, the plant's there, and then it's just there dug up. We don't bag them up and take it away because it's too dangerous for our staff. That one bird from the brochure, we were bagging and taking away at a park. And we don't do that anymore. And then herbicide, the patch is there and then it dies, goes away for humble removal. The flowers are there and then they're not. But for instance, if you do humble removal, you still have to, there's a second round where they have to go through and either spray it or root cut it. Because if you remove the umbel before the plant has set seed, the plant just makes more flowers. You could use umbel control as its only form if it was in seed form. But if it's in flower form, you have to go ahead and control the rest of the plant. So I just wanted to show you a couple examples, local examples of success. We have 2 sites on Long Island that were pretty brutal because we don't do, we just do root cutting here. We don't do herbicide control because it's too long to send someone with a truck from Syracuse and Rochester just for these 2 things. So it's myself and whoever is working with me. And this site had 630 plants to start. You're just seeing a small portion of it. So the first year people worked for a long time digging. But the next year you can see there was just 5 plants. That's just the list, and then 30, and then 15, and then 17, and then 10, and then 7, and then 1, and then 0, and then who knows because it was COVID, and then 0. And then this year we just found 2. Here's Josh digging like the 2 juvenile plants that he found. So pretty effective form of control. And the reason you get a bunch of like up and downs is because you're fighting with the seed bank. I'm actually quite surprised that there was only 5 the next year. Usually it's like you dig 630 and then the next year you'll find like 1200 because you had a flush of seedlings. But maybe the landowner did something that we didn't know about, or there was so much other vegetation that didn't do well. But anyhow, that's a great example of success. Then this is another one in Suffolk County, out in the Hamptons area. This one, the little P's mean partial. The first year somebody went, they just did 122 plants. They were all adults and said that's enough. It was, yeah. And then the next year, myself and Stephanie went and we dug for like 5 hours, almost 1,000 plants. We still didn't finish it all, but then we went to 231, 65, and then pretty much dropped off. And now the little house that was there is gone. It's just a huge mini mansion. Yeah, you guys were there. Yep. So there isn't any, you know, most of the spots for the hogweed was just gone altogether. We did find some just a little bit north of it on a different tax parcel. So we have to go back. So you have to just keep going too. Another thing is even when you're searching, like that's what it looked like this year. If there's a tiny seedling in there, we probably didn't find it. But when we go next year, we'll find it, or the next year as it gets bigger. So it is like a multi-year program. But it's amazing. So it used to be like, oh, we're going to Long Island. Now it's like, oh, we're going to Long Island. And then this is just to show you some of the bigger sites, like this is one in Livingston County that was huge, you know, an acre or so, and using herbicide is really effective too, right? See, there was tons of plants, now not so many plants. This is a nice slide. It's from the end of last year, so it doesn't include this year's numbers, but the purple ones are the eradicated ones where there's been no hogweed for 3 or more years, and the blue ones are ones that were actively being monitored this year. So yeah, about 56% of our sites now have no plants due to prior control. So it's definitely like perseverance pays off for hogweed. We also implemented stream survey. This is something I wanted to do years ago. We never had any funding. So sort of like towards the end of the, well, not the end, in the middle, who knows, some point during our program, we finally got to do stream survey. And so we're looking for more sites sort of upstream. We want to make sure that the sites that we know of are the most, you know, upstream sites. And then we also are doing a little bit downstream of known sites. So we prioritize the rivers that we want to focus on first. And we can do this, you know, in perpetuity, but we typically find a little bit each time. So it's nice to finally add this in. There are control challenges. Some of them are good. This top one is just showing like some of those really large sites in central and western New York. Our issue now is we've controlled a lot of the plants, so it's hard to find them, right? But you have this big, you know, acre, 2 or 3 area that you have to now survey. We don't have the sniffing dogs because they don't want the dogs to sniff hogweed. Unfortunately, though, I keep trying. So we just have to have a lot of people out looking for maybe just like 15 or 20 plants. So The other is just that there are a seed bank that we just have to keep going to. You know, even if we control the ones that germinate, we still have to go enough times that we outlast it. So we have 3 years, we call it eradicated, then we skip 2 years, then we go again, and we skip 2 years and we go again, thinking that like the typical plant flowers every 3 to 5 years. So we try to hit it every 3 years for 9 or 12 total. And then some owners don't allow us to do control. That's another issue. So for this one, it's a huge herbicide site. They don't allow herbicides, so we just do humble removal after seed set along the property boundaries to try to keep it from spreading to the neighbors. And then the other one is in like moisture areas. When you do the root cutting, you really have to make sure that you don't put it back on the soil or it will resprout. So that's a training thing and also just a remember thing. And then, of course, our sources of spread still exist. Roadside mowing is an issue. Riparian areas are a real challenge, especially areas with flooding. So it's hard to search for, you know, it's not just in the stream corridor. Some of the seeds might have gotten pushed up into a field. So you have to really be lucky when you can find them. Access denied. We have a couple of people like on a stream or on a road that just refuse to allow anyone to come. And we don't have the ability to force people to do it. Just some counties have laws, some towns have laws, but at the state level, we don't have that power, unfortunately. And again, not enough time for staff, though we have a lot, we just don't have as much as I wish. So people wonder, is eradication really possible? I would say there's a couple things that say it is possible on sites where we have control on a statewide level. It's not, because we have these few landowners that refuse access. But on an individual property, it is. The seed matures in 3 years, right? So you get that little bit of time to get in before it flowers and set seed. Our control methods work. It struggles to hide in plain sight, right? If it's along a road or a stream or anywhere that people go, when it's an adult, people notice it. However, if it's hiding in someone's property, we'll never know about it unless someone reports it. It's not spread by wildlife. We have had consistent funding, and most landowners are cooperative and thrilled to have us come and remove this plant. And perseverance, I think, for hogweed has paid off. I mean, 56%, one of these days will be at 60 and then 70. Who knows where we'll stop, but all the people, you know, I love to think about the fact that many landowners no longer have hogweed on their property. And this is one that was like behind a school that had 10,000 plants in 2008. And it had 3 years of herbicide control, and now it's one of those ones where we just have to send a lot of people to survey. This year they found 42, last year like 20, 10, you know, but it's a big area to survey with not many plants. And I think the last part is really just, what you can do to help, and then a little bit on ID. So basically, just learn to identify it and then report it to others. You would report it to the information line. You can just Google giant hogweed and you'll go to our DEC page and it'll give you that information. I have brochures too. Basically, we're looking for photos, directions of the plants, and the general size of the infestation. If it's small or large, it helps me know what kind of crew to send out, an herbicide or a root cut crew. If you have the landowner's information, that's ideal because we can't go without permission. And then if it's confirmed, we add it to our database and we send crews out to survey and control each year. And then this next slide is just saying what local governments and interested groups can do. Basically, help with outreach would be, you know, we're really on a statewide level. Anything more local, you're going to get a better outcome. So train people to report it. Help stop the spread, like any highway departments that you do outreach to or connect with. Just really try to teach them not to mow when it's in seed, and the same thing for wild parsnip. If anybody ever wants to learn how to control it, we'll be happy to train them. And then local noxious weed laws in areas where we have refuseniks, it's always greatly appreciated. So if you guys are ready to become hogweed experts, Yuri will see if you can remember all these tips. Again, it can be really tall when it's mature. The leaves are like, I think of them sort of like a maple leaf on like a mean maple leaf, if that makes sense, like a nightmare maple leaf. It's really incised and like, very, very big when it's an adult. This is the main thing that you can always use at any life stage. It's going to have these coarse white hairs that like go up and down the stem. They'll be more thick, like encircling the stem. There'll be like a little white bunch there, but they also go up and down, and then purple blotches. So it needs to be green stem, purple blotches, coarse white hairs with a clump around the stem. And again, I'm just showing you that it can look really different, right? Nature has a lot of diversity, variety. This is when it's young, the clump seems to be really noticeable. As it gets older, like some of those coarse hairs seem to thin out, and like a really older one maybe doesn't even have much of a clump. But it can have a lot of purple, a little bit of purple. Over on the right, you can see some pictures of cow parsnip, which looks a lot like giant hogweed. It's our native version, it's another Heracleum. Doesn't have any purple blotches. Well, there's a caveat. There's some areas of the state that actually do have some purple blotches, like the Catskill areas and maybe up the northern part. But for the most part, there's no purple blotches. And then the hairs are like kind of fine. They're a different consistency. I wouldn't say that they're like coarse or bristly. They're just sort of like fine hairs that go more uniformly up and down the stem. And there's never going to be a cluster where the leaves attach. And then Angelica, which is another common lookalike, is all purple and it's smooth. It doesn't have any hairs whatsoever. If it's flowering, then you can, you might see cow parsnip and say, I think that's giant hogweed because it looks very similar. But if it's flowering, you can tell the difference very easily. So if you look at the umbel, all these little lines that come out, those are called the rays of the umbel, flower rays. So giant hogweed will have like 50 or more rays per umbel, right? It's going to be a really big, sturdy flower head. Cow parsnip is going to have 15 to 30 rays. So if you count them, and it's kind of like a nice, it's still a big flower, but compared to giant hogweed, it's much smaller. And they're, that's going to hold true. And they're all like flat top where the flowers, the white flowers are on top, right? Like a little Queen Anne's lace. Angelica, which is another common one, I think of that as kind of like fireworks, it goes up and then the flowers come out in every single direction. It's like a ball. It is not a flat topped umbel. Another thing with giant hogweed and cow parsnip is for cow parsnip, when you look at it, really is just like a flat topped umbel, right? It's white and goes straight across, but for giant hogweed, it's like a dome, like an umbrella shape, because it has so many little rays it's trying to stick into that one spot that it has to dome it up to make room for all of them. So the leaves, as I was mentioning, really vary. They start out, this is tiny little seedling. Then this is showing them in different years as they get bigger, and then they can get really large at the end. So they get bigger and bigger and bigger each year. But they always have, even in the little baby stage, they still have, I don't know if you guys can see, they still have purple blotches and coarse white hairs. So there's lots of other things like yellow over the ground kind of look like it. But if you look at the stem, it needs to have purple blotches, coarse white hairs at all stages. And then these are some of the other common lookalikes that we get reported to us. Again, cow parsnip can be really big, it can be small. Then wild parsnip, angelica, elderberry when it's flowering. People call that in a lot, poison hemlock, and Queen Anne's lace. Sort of the main ones, and I think that is it. Thanks to all our funders and the staff.
Thank you.
So if you guys have any questions, you already did they all.
Thank you, Naja. Your work is amazing. It's one of the most incredible control efforts I have seen. To watch the numbers go down from thousands to tens and then to some zeros over the, overall of Long Island, but also the state.
Right.
It's pretty impressive. We're looking forward to helping you more with that.
Would be
The
great.
three of us.
Perfect.
The whole LIISMA team is here today.
Well, there's a couple of sites where you can get some good beach time.
Yeah, you'll be like,
On lunch. of
when
course.
you said the beach time and all that, I was
Then
so,
it works.
I was so.
Yeah,
But
no, I
very-
noticed when we told her the zero and two, it was like, ah.
It's great when you do, really.
Yeah, it's really satisfying because you really can make a difference. And also, like, when we started, I remember everybody poo-pooed that we had a manual option. I don't know why, they just thought like you could only control it with herbicide. Like, I don't think that's the case. I have these studies right here that show that we can use manual control, and that's what we're gonna do. We're only gonna use herbicide if we need it. And,
Yeah.
and it works great, and there's no,
Mhm.
no need for us to use it if we don't need to. But it's
It's
great to
similar
have
to
it
what we're
when we
trying to
do.
do with Phragmite. We're spading,
Mhm.
which is similar to the way you're cutting, not weed, similar. And then underwater cutting, where Phragmites, it's in standing water.
Oh.
Manual. control. I have a question. This must involve an awful lot of landowner contact, reaching out to landowners. How do you do that? How do you reach?
So
Do
we.
you write them, email them, knock on the door?
So we
Yeah.
assign each crew, so we have a number of crews, and each crew gets maybe like 150, maybe around 150 sites. And we have our database, which has all the information that we've gathered, so it often has emails, phone numbers, cell numbers. And then they're responsible, so they start out with emails, that's easy, if nobody responds, and they move on to phones, if that doesn't work, then they'll move on to door knocking.
Mm.
And we do have one person that works with us, Sylvia, who is like, I don't know, maybe a detective in her former life or something. She is amazing. So like the really tricky ones, somebody says, I can't find any contact information, you give it to Sylvia, and if it's out there somewhere, she might find someone's work number. I don't know. She finds them.
Okay. You have to do some detective work.
Yes, and so for kudzu, we have actually Sylvia and Dan, the information line person, they do all the contacts ahead of time because we have just a really short person window for control. So we do that in advance for them, but the crews have like 4 months to basically contact everybody.
You get permission in writing or
So-
verbal?
For herbicide control, we won't do control unless we have a written assigned thing, and that's good for perpetuity. But we still need to contact everybody every year because maybe the ownership changed, maybe they have some different requests. So we only get signed permission once, and then verbal permission yearly. And then for manual control, we'll go on the property with just verbal permission or email permission. whatever.
How about flyers, like handouts for homeowners? I mean, do you leave it like something hanging on their mailbox or?
So we have brochures. Thank
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
Tim.
yeah. Tim's got the
We have brochures, we have like what we call a no one home letter, which is basically like a paragraph at the top about hogweed and then our program, and we include a brochure, a permission form for them to send back. After we do control, we also have like a control summary that has our contact information, a bunch of it, like most salient points and like little check boxes that shows what we've done. So it'll be like, all the control is done, we root cut 45 plants, we did umbel removal on 15, and we'll see you next year.
Yeah.
Or we sprayed herbicide control, so something that they can hold on to and see the results. And then there's a little spot for the crews to write something like, I'll write like, great, this is next year will be the 3rd year with no plants, like it will soon be eradicated or something like that.
It's great. It's a model for any early detection, rapid response, the way you contact them and get permission, and it's good.
Yeah, and we're happy to like share everything, and we have done so with other countries, states, agencies. You're welcome to, nobody should be reinventing the wheel, like just take it and put your own logo on it, I'm fine with that. And all of our permissions are good for prisms and municipal agencies as well. Like we added that language in maybe very back in the beginning, so that it says, I give permission for DEC, its representatives, other municipal agencies and organizations. And the kudzu one even has prism on it right there, because the Lower Hudson prism does like half of the sites. You guys are gonna do a bunch soon. Those ones I'll happily pass off because they are not zero. So yeah, it's a real pleasure and it's so nice to like finally meet you guys as well
Yes.
in person,
Yeah,
regardless of people breaking my windows.
it's hard to get
Or
here.
you
but-
Come back.
Are there any questions on the interweb?
No questions from me in the chat, but if you have any or anybody wants to unmute themselves, feel free.
I have another question. The seed bank, how long do the seeds remain viable in the soil?
I have a really bad memory for numbers. I think I said 7 years, 5
You
or
said it,
7
yeah.
years. But like I said too, in lab studies, I know it was 12 to 15 years or something like that. But I think most of them, 90% of them will germinate their first year.
Right away.
And then it's just
Yeah,
like
they
that
Stay around, yeah.
other 10% that you're just sort of waiting out. So. Cool. Well, it's my pleasure.
Well, thank you, Nina. That was great. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, what time do we have?
It's about 1:37.
1:37. All right, the meeting officially ended at 1:30. We went a little bit over. Yeah, does anyone have any final thoughts, comments, questions? You can always reach us by email, LIISMAprism@gmail.com. If you have any thoughts or questions about today, just email us and we'll contact one of the speakers or do whatever we have to do. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, thank you. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.